Before we begin, let me direct the committee secretary to acknowledge our resource persons for this morning or this afternoon.
Good afternoon. I would like to acknowledge your guests and resource persons for today's public hearing. From the Department of Energy, Yusek Donato Marcos, ASEC Leonido Pulido III, ASEC Gerardo Erguisa, Director Rino Abad. From the Energy Regulatory Commission, Attorney Mildred Ople. From the National Power Corporation, Attorney Manuel Luis Plofino. From the Philippine National Oil Company, Mr. Ruben Lista, President and CEO. From the Philippine National Oil Company Exploration Corporation, Mr. Candido Magsumbol, Attorney Datu Omar Sinswat. From the Manila Electric Company, Attorney Jose Ronald Valles, Mr. Lawrence Fernandez. From Shell Philippines Exploration, Mr. Don Paulino. From Chevron Philippines, Ms. Belinda Racela. From AC Energy Holdings, Attorney Rio Inocencio. From Gregorio Araneta Incorporated, Mr. Alfonso Araneta, Vice President. From Energy World Corporation Limited, Engineer Diana Dabu, Mr. Graham Elliott. From First Gen, Mr. Vincent Martin Villegas. From SMC Global Power Holdings Corporation, Mr. Jose Raimundo. From Management Association of the Philippines, Mr. Ernesto Pantanco. From Citizen Watch Philippines, Attorney Hannah May Viola. From Laban Consumer Incorporated, Attorney Victorio Mario Di Magiba. And from KEPCO Ilihan Power Corporation, Mr. Choi Sangjay, General Manager. Everyone has been acknowledged, sir.
Thank you, Comsec, and again, good afternoon to everyone. After the many hearings we conducted here in the Committee on Energy, for me this is actually one of the more exciting hearings because for the first time we'll be hearing from the Department of Energy the official policy on the Philippine downstream natural gas industry. And much of my information actually came from the newspaper and also from the television, but today we'll be hearing from the department, no less than the department, the official policy in the development of the downstream natural gas industry. We also want to hear updates regarding this downstream natural gas industry. We also want to hear the constraints and the challenges being faced by the department as well as the private sectors who we invited this afternoon. In our list there are about, I think, 9 potential investors or 9 potential entities who are very interested in putting up facilities here in our country. So we also want to learn from the private proponents what are the issues, the challenges, what are the measures that we need to implement so that we can hasten the development of the natural gas industry in our country. We also want to learn some of the legislative proposals to bring stability to this industry. Right now, the entire natural gas or the entire downstream natural gas industry is being governed by a department circular, no? And we all know that the department circular also has limitations. So we also want to learn from the department and also get suggestions from the private sector as to what are the important components to come up with a strong legislative measure to be the guiding framework of the downstream natural gas industry. So with that, we have a lot of guests for this afternoon, and as a tradition, we always start with the lead agency, which is the Department of Energy, and I understand, Yusek, that we have a presentation now. So we'll turn over the floor to you.
Honorable Chair of the Committee on Energy, Senator Winty Gatchalian, colleagues in the energy sector, the OE family, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. We are very much privileged, sir, to be one of the resource persons or the lead agency that will be discussing and coming up with the legislation that will address the issues, gaps, challenges in the energy sector and help us to attain the energy security and reliability, of course, in terms of supply and demand. And with your indulgence, Honorable Chair, may we humbly request for the presentation. Okay. Yes, Director Rino, your recommendation.
Mr. Chair, good afternoon. I will now go down to the actual presentation. The department will actually attempt to provide in this hearing the overview of the natural gas and, of course, the basic information on its status. At present, we only have one source of natural gas operating. There are on the horizons, on the upstream side, there are actually service contracts which are operative at this point in time, but they are still at the point of exploration. We have one in Cebu, but also under development before it can produce. So at present, the one really producing is only the one with service contract number 38, otherwise known the Malampaya natural gas to power project. Now, in this slide, it shows that the 2.7 TCF way back in 2001 has actually serviced users of around 3,400 megawatts. We can see in this slide we have 97 megawatts from Avion, 516 megawatt from San Lorenzo. We have 1,000 megawatt from Santa Rita, 1,200 megawatt from Ilihan. We have also 414 megawatt from San Gabriel, and we have also the utilization from the Shell refinery. All in all, we have a production of around 3,400 megawatts of power. It translates that power translates into around 26% of the country's installed capacity for year 2016, and around 15.9% for the first quarter of 2017. Overall, in the power generation, it comprises around 21%. The 3,400 megawatt comprises around 21%. This slide will actually describe in a nutshell that the Malampaya as the one only producing natural gas would justify the need for an importation for LNG. These are the conclusions. In the short term, Philippines has no sufficient supply from Malampaya or other potential developments to justify new infra development. In other words, the indigenous supply wouldn't, support infra development on natural gas for the reason that there is no clear, at this point in time, a service contract which could replace the Malampaya. So new gas might come from domestic resources, but the volumes and timing are unpredictable because of the fact that exploration, development, and production is actually unpredictable. They try to limit that with so-called studies and drillings, but overall the level of predictability is still a challenge. The logical solution of the new gas would be the import of liquefied natural gas to ensure supply security and sustainability of natural gas. Of course, in anticipation of the depletion of the supply from the Malampaya. So, of course, this is in line with the recent. This is actually a a new way of looking the policy thrust and direction under the administration of Secretary Cusi and President Duterte. Simply put, the policy thrust is to ensure the continuity of power supply. And 21% from the Malampaya gas, comprising around 3,400, is really a concern for continuity of security supply in the power sector. The second, next slide. And then we have designed actually the development strategy. Of course, the establishment of natural gas quality, we already have a PNS on this, so we have complied with that. The PNS is always a standard to be improved over the years, but at this point in time, we already have the PNS for the natural gas quality standard. We also have this is a challenge now. We can do this. This is more of a share of an actual practice. So we can definitely do the PNS for the natural gas facilities once we can establish at least one actually operating. So that operator can actually help us develop this one. So we have the standard on natural gas, but we don't have standard on the natural gas facility. So it's a combination actually when the time comes. There's a natural gas quality and natural gas facility standard. And then we continue to do the IEC activities, mainly precisely because we need the interest from the investors. We advocate the passage of department legislative agenda. We always come, of course, with the call for hearings in aid of legislation. We always support that. And the fifth part would be ensuring that gas-related activities be part of the investment priority. At this point in time, our existing regulation only points out to the BOI. But of course, if we can produce a specific legislation on natural gas, downstream natural gas, we could actually include a specific provisions for incentives. But at this point in time, the existing regulation points to the inclusion of the natural gas industry to the investment code under the BOI administration. We have the last part would be to actually, this is connected with the need for legislation, implement a zero import duty of LNG importation because I think the real impact of the import duty would be in the end will be passed on to the consumers. So to conclude, actually, the opportunities for investment, because of the fact that we really need the 3,427 megawatt gas upon the depletion of Malampaya. But above and beyond that, the Philippines will need 43,760. But this is according to the Philippine Energy Plan. This is equivalent to the 6% expected growth of electricity need, aligned with the 6 to 7% GDP growth from 2017-18 to 2040. So we have 43, there's a computation and it arrived to 43,700 megawatt by 2040. This is over and above of what we have now of around 16,000 megawatt. But of course, this is not, it has to be divided on a specific demand classification, which is base load would be around 14,500 megawatt. Mid-merit would be around around 4,000 for peaking, 14,500 megawatt for mid-merit, and the rest, of course, will be for base load. Well, based also on the Philippine Energy Plan, and of course with the Renewable Energy Act, it shows that there is also an aim to increase the current level of 5,000 megawatt based on 2010, year 2010, to 15,000 megawatt by 2030. And of course, a gas power plant would be an excellent complement to the intermittent nature of some of our or most of our renewable. At present, the ideal would be diesel power plant, but an option would be a good thing if we have an available natural gas supply. An additional potential demand for LNG will come from the off-grid. This is also a challenge because of the fact that most of our off-grid, or including those off-grid with missionary, still on missionary status, predominantly maybe around 95% is powered also by diesel. So again, upon the availability of natural gas, we could actually provide an option other than diesel, which is natural gas. LNG will be primarily consumed in the power sector, but will soon cover the non-power. That's why a very basic salient feature of the regulation includes the third-party access, because we would like to provide an industry an avenue for it to expand and liquefy, to be liquid. In other words, that it does not only centers on the power sector, but could include non-power need. Next slide. This is just coming from this supports the Philippine Energy Plan computation on the 43,000 megawatt need by 2040. So it is actually a barely 17-year period by which the investors would be needed actually to fulfill that 43,000 megawatt. At present, we have more or less 16,000 megawatt, but we build those plants over 100 years, perhaps, and to build a 43,000 megawatt within a 17-year time frame would really be a challenge for everyone. And the next slide. On the Department of Energy side, of course, with the administration of our secretary, we have pursued implementing rules which could actually pave the way for the investors to come in. In fact, this is a very good executive order. This provides for the creation of an energy investment coordinating council. In fact, this could be an ideal way to facilitate investment which could be classified as energy project of national significance. It provides basically for a 30-day period to get permits from the different agencies of the government, from the Department of Energy towards ECC, from the Department of Environment and Natural Resources, and NCIP, and so on and so forth. So at present, we are finalizing the implementing rules on this executive order. Of course, we coupled the executive order with the specific rule. This is an improved rule from the interim. This is no longer an interim rules, but this is a specific rule now governing the Philippine downstream natural gas. The basic changes in this rule is that it clarified now the basic policy of the government, the approach that it would take, policies like deregulated market, policies on how the applications will be evaluated. So we have included there specific annexes to clarify the documents to be submitted, the procedure that the DOE would take to evaluate the project, including the specific body which will actually evaluate the application for downstream LNG on sectors like terminal, pipeline, including transmission lines. Next slide. I have mentioned this already. To be specific, these are the permits that an applicant would actually get from the Department of Energy, or this is only from Department of Energy, but there are requirements also to be followed by the applicant in compliance to other government or rules or laws from the DNR, as I mentioned, in CIP, Department of Labor, and so on and so forth. So these are the permits, and we can actually verify the procedure, the documental requirements, and how the DOE will actually evaluate upon as a requisite for the issuance of these permits. And then this is just the basic concept. This is being highlighted because this will actually provide for an avenue to liquefy the industry. This will provide a way of maximizing the facility from both the owner and of course from the non-owner of the terminal facility. They can actually use the facility to get the gas, but of course they have to pay for that service. But this is a way of liquefying the industry later on from power to non-power demand. Next slide. That would be the presentation.
Thank you, Director. I have a few basic questions, no? And these are really elementary. Why do we need natural gas in our energy mix? Anyone from DOE who wants to answer that very basic question? Kasi prior to Malampaya, wala naman tayong gas, you know? We're all surviving in the other forms of energy, but after the inclusion of natural gas in the system.
Yeah, sir, the one basic, a very basic advantage of natural gas as a fuel is that it can transcend from base load, mid-merit, even to the peaking. In other words, it is a fuel which can actually be used for different kinds of power plant design. Of course, coal can do the job for the base load, but it has that limitation that it cannot, it wouldn't be economical to provide the supply for power on the peaking side. But the good thing with natural gas, it can actually transcend. It might be a competitive area for base load, but as it is now, Malampaya is supplying actually around 2,700 megawatt on the base load side. And it is now, Malampaya is also providing on the peaking side, which is with the Avion, and the mid-merit, which is 400 for San Gabriel. So it transcends to all kinds of demands. It can provide for all kinds of demands. It has just one requirement, of course. It has to be feasible and economical. But that is something that has to be studied. But the proof is there, sir, that it is now being used on different kinds of demand.
Director, but that's not the answer that Attorney Dimagiwa wants to hear. Ito ba ay mura o hindi mura? No? I mean, that's the answer that everyone wants to hear is, did natural gas lower down our electricity price or not? Because before we continue with all of this natural gas policy, I think the basic element here is it advantageous to the consumer or not? No? I mean, the flexibility that you mentioned is advantageous to the generator for sure. No? But how about to the consumer? No?
Mr. Chair, first the concept, Mr. Chair, may I be allowed to add? The basic concept is that we need baseload power. And when we talk about baseload power as a reliable source of power, the number one traditional source is coal. And as of now, we may say that it's the cheapest, it's not among the cheapest. But we are having some problems with coal. And as we know, environmentally, coal is not the best source of power. And so we have to strike a balance. Have to strike a balance. And among the sources of base load are geothermal and hydroelectric. At this point, natural gas is being treated basically because of the huge amount of power it is delivering as base load. Comparable with coal, it is really more expensive, but compared with peaking plants, it is less expensive, and it is considered also as the director said, as a sort of mid-merit power. So if you're going to compare it with the traditional sources of power, reliable power, it's really more expensive. But at this point, we will have it because it is environmental friendly.
Yeah, we understand the advantage of natural gas in terms of being environmentally friendly. But all indicator, if you look at the basic pricing, it's really more expensive than coal, no? And at this point, part of the inquiry is really to determine whether, aside from being environmentally friendly, is it advantageous to the consumer? Because the consumer, at the end of the day, is more conscious about the price, no? And we have our internal study, no? In fact, we've run some basic simulation. But I would like to know, on the part of DOE, ano po yung inyong based on your research, how much more will the consumer have to pay if ever we continue with what Director Abad said earlier of building a terminal and importing natural gas? No? You said earlier that it's slightly more expensive, but how much will it translate to the electricity bill of our consumers? Magkano po yung magiging effect to the consumer? Hopefully sana walang effect, or hopefully the effect will be a lower electricity rate, no? But no, just looking at the pricing right now, for me it will have a negative effect in terms of a slight increase in the cost of power of our consumers. But I would like to learn and appreciate it from the research of DOE. No, meron ba ho kayong research that you want to share with the committee?
Yes, sir. If I may add lang. First of all, sir, the policy statement of the Department of Energy is they are technology neutral. Any form of energy resource is okay as long as we can have a healthy energy mix policy. And of course, sir, we have to be predictable in terms of resource because we know that oil and others are shorter life now of resource globally, and natural gas is a longer life of resource now. Except, of course, not mentioning nuclear also, which has a longer reserve. Natural gas, at the moment, while in terms of consumer, there is a PSA that was agreed upon recently by Meralco, wherein it seems to be cheaper than coal. The Avion, I don't know, may first gen, but first gen, the San Gabriel power plant and Meralco has reached a PSA. They agree on something like
less than 4 pesos.
Yeah, 390, I think. So, meaning, sir, it goes lower also than coal. So, in terms of the consumer, I think on the later period, as you regain the capex, I think that nat gas or that gas with its flexibility can also bid for a lower pricing because it can be used for base load. And definitely to come up with a healthy energy mix, you have to, because actually the energy mix policy or the statement that we are pushing now is 70-20-10. Wherein definitely 70 for base load, which is stabilize the grid, and of course to regulate it, we have a mid-merit there which is 20%. And nat gas can play on both baseload and mid-merit, and of course the peaking. So definitely, yes, nat gas can also address a very healthy energy mix that also addresses a lower cost. And with respect to sustainability and predictability in resource, in life, that we can source out globally, it is longer than coal, and it is longer than oil, and even it is a transition. It is used as a transition energy in going to a renewable energy. Yes, sir.
Thank you, Yusek. Well, part of the responsibility of this committee is to assure the consumer groups, ably represented by Attorney Dimagiba, that whatever policy the Department of Energy undertakes should redound to a positive experience to our consumers. And I also have to assure our consumer groups that this policy is advantageous to them, no? And one of the most critical components of being or being considered as advantageous is pricing, no? The attorney. At the end, what we want is, aside from giving flexibility, is also sana, no, at some point, a lower price to our consumers. And my question is, have you run any simulation, any research as to if we undertake importation, no, and looking at, there are so many forecasting models, no, that we can use. Using the various forecasting models, is this advantageous to the consumers in terms of pricing? Have you undertaken any simulation?
Sir, we have a study. We will
Ano
submit,
po?
sir.
Sige po.
We have a study. But as it is now, practically, coal will be much lower in price, more expensive if you compare it to LNG. But compared to diesel, I mean, you have to position the right kind of fuel for the right demand. For mid-merit and peaking, coal cannot actually compete. It will be very, very expensive for a power plant, contracting a coal power plant to provide mid-merit and peaking. Because it will just run for 4 hours, and yet you will be paying for a 24/7 power plant. So you have to design. It's what Yusek Marcos has stated, that it actually provides for a healthy mix rather than just talk about price per se. It's so very limited when you talk about price. You have to also to take into account the appropriateness of natural gas to fuel up a power plant, which should be appropriate for mid-merit and peaking. As it is now, it's really much lower in price compared to diesel, which is now servicing most of our mid-merit to peaking. Really more cheaper than diesel, but a little bit expensive than coal. But again, they're not. You have to position them properly so you can optimize the price in the end. To do otherwise will actually give us more expensive price for power. To do otherwise, you have to position it properly so you can optimize the price.
I understand, Director, there are a lot of technical constraints, no? But again, no, before we celebrate the era of natural gas here in our country, or the entry of imported natural gas in our country, we have to manage expectation. And it's our job, no? In the committee to manage expectation. That's why in most of our hearings, actually in all, the consumer groups are invited. Precisely because we put a lot of importance to the welfare of our consumer groups. So every policy that the department or the regulator will undertake should have very accurate information being transmitted to our consumer groups. Kung hindi man, then we manage expectations, no? Because right now, the policy is to go imported, but ano ba ito, what is this to Juan de la Cruz? No? I mean, this is very elementary and basic, no?
Sir, if I may add, sir, the Philippine Downstream Natural Gas Regulation does not only pertains or focus on importation. We have 3 business model actually, sir, on that regulation. The one is if there's a new discovery and it's too far to be feasible or economically feasible in coming up with a pipeline just like the 504 kilometers of Malampaya, then on the actual platform itself, you will build a liquefaction on that. So that's one of the business model. The other, sir, business model is if you discover comparatively the same as of the Malampaya principle, then you can go pipeline with the 500. So it's part of the regulation also, sir.
I understand, Yusek. Then again, we will not probably terminate the hearing today, but we will like to see your simulation and your models that you supposedly undertook to determine how much is the impact to our electricity bill. And again, this is in due fairness to our consumer groups who've been religiously attending this hearing to understand the energy policy of our country. And I think I owe it to them to make sure that they appreciate whether it's good or whether it's bad. Yan talagang reality, but at least the expectations were managed. In the next hearing, we'll ask you to present it to us. Another question, Director. In your presentation, you said here that Malampaya concession expires in 2024 and drop in supply is expected to start by 2022. What is the policy now on Malampaya and its impending expiration? Ano po ang policy?
Sir, if I may, sir. Actually, sir, I'm the supervising USEC on that issue. And right now, before I came into the Department of Energy, there was a pending letter of request, I think, like 2009 or 2010 for the renewal of the service contract 38. We have not yet acted on it because we have to really study, scrutinize what are the options to be considered. Meaning, is it more advantageous to the government to go with the government-to-government transaction, meaning DOE to PNOC, or are we going to? It is more advantageous to the government to go and extend the server contract. So we're coming up, sir, with a comprehensive study in order to recommend to the good secretary what is really the bottom line is favorable to the consuming public.
Siguro another elementary question is may laman pa ba after 2022?
Sir, geologically,
Kasi I mean there's no point of extending it if by 2022 there's
yes, sir.
nothing
Geologically and scientifically presented by SC38. Meron pa naman, sir, in the next 5 years. That's why they're applying for ano. And there are some maybe possible or potential discoveries that can be done within the service contract area.
Okay.
So there is the Malampaya East of another 100 billion cubic.
This is within the SC38.
This is within the SC38. Okay. Kaya lang, sir, actually it was included in the work plan of the service contract 38 before, but because hindi ganun siya kalaki at hindi profitable or economically viable to the big consortium to address that, so nakapending lang muna siya. But of course there is a consideration that PNOC might carve it out, PNOCEC maybe might carve it out and then do the drilling for itself, relinquishing it to PNOCEC. So those are studies that we are taken into consideration.
So right now, 2022 is the expected start of depletion. After 2022 onwards, ano po ang pwede pa nating makuha dyan in terms of capacity?
Sir, may I request SC38 or to, because actually they are the one who are presenting those
yeah,
figures.
we'll ask them to present, but I want to hear it from DOE, so I'll know kung alam niyo o hindi, Diba? I want to hear it from I know alam nila for sure, pero I want to hear from you kung alam ninyo o hindi.
Mr. Chair, kasi po there's really no 100% or accurate way to measure the exact volume. So there are about 3 probabilities po, based on the studies made by the DOE and based also on the studies made by the consortium. And the 3 probabilities are that, it's either there's about 10%, a 10% probability The gas reserve, Mr. Chair, is at 3.08 trillion cubic feet. At 50% probability, the gas reserve will be about 3.17, and at 90% probability, the gas volume will be about 3.29 trillion cubic feet. Until now, Mr. Chair, there's no technology that would give us a very, very accurate volume of the gas still. So it's all based on probability, Mr. Chair.
So, itong existing well, definitely by 2022 it will start depleting, no? And based on the conservative estimates, how long will it take for it to completely disappear, no? Based on your research?
Mr. Chair,
And then, is there any, no, I'm asking this, have you run any simulation conservatively as to what are the potential reserves that we can still extract and how long are those reserves available?
actually, Mr. Chair, the facts and data of these are inputs from a monthly meetings with the consortium, and also we do due diligence. Our technical or our experts make some due diligence on this arithmetics, Mr. Chair, and as one of the findings that beyond the Malampaya contract period, which is 2024, Malampaya gas field is estimated to produce natural gas in 3 years' time to provide the requirement of only 1,000 megawatt capacity of gas-fired power plant.
What do you mean, you said?
Sir, at the moment we are supplying around 3,400
okay.
Megawatts. By the time of its depletion, after in 3 years' time, we will be only providing 1,000 megawatts capacity.
When will that start?
After 2024, Your Honor.
After 2024. My point of the matter here is definitely after 2022 makakakuha pa tayo dyan no? For sure, no? And we don't need to replace 3,400 megawatts immediately after 2022, correct?
Sir, there's a need because there's a demand already. There's an existing market already, which is the 3,400. That's why we need to anticipate this demands, this requirement. That's why we're coming up with because the discovery is somewhat unpredictable. So we need to come up with a very reliable source, which is the first business model, which is importation.
Right. But I also understand that in that same well, you can still increase capacity, correct?
Yes, sir, but very minimal also. That's 100 billion cubic foot.
Okay.
And that is only good for that's only good for 1 year. And that it was taken away or carved out from the work program of SC38 because they are too big to handle a small resource like that. I think that's their issue there. Is that your issue? But it was carved out. I take note of that in one of the meetings, in one of the monthly meetings.
So in other words, by 2022, wala na ho tayong makikitang significant find in SC38.
Sir, that is that needs to be explored. Yung the buong SC38.
SC38, in which Shell has the...
sir, it was not included in the work program already. Yung other exploration on the SC38.
But they can submit a work program because that's part of their concession.
Yes, sir. If they request for a extension of that, we might as well ask them what are the possible, what is the way forward or the work program that you are seeing.
Okay. We'll ask sila doon and Shell Company about that. No, but I just wanted to extract information from the UE regarding. Again, what I'm trying to drive at is up post 2022, no? May makukuha pa tayo dyan. It will not be completely zero, no? In the Malampaya well. And my point is, what is the deficiency, no, in terms of gas supply, and is that deficiency economically viable for importation, or at least proponents to build terminals or bring FSRUs and operate on a importation basis. That's what I'm driving at, no? Because all of this should synchronize, eh. Or else, if they will say na meron pang lumalabas, no, o meron pang ganitong capacity, then any investor will not come in because the upfront investment is quite significant. No? So that's why I wanted to see some simulation also as to at one point in time where it will be economically viable for importation to happen. No?
Yes, sir, Your Honor. Mr. Chair, as I mentioned, after 2024, it will be depleted into 1,000 megawatts. And in anticipation to that, that's why we come up with this regulation to really anticipate that requirements. And we are not only focusing on this market requirements, but of course we are developing other demands or other markets such as transport, industrial, commercial, and ultimately even household are targeted as market. That's why it's really a very big and integrated project.
Going back to the concession, you said the concession will expire 2024, and the DOE now is in the process of still studying whether it's advantageous or not advantageous, correct?
Sir, we are very determined and specific that we need to come up with the importation first, because discovery is very unpredictable, and there are so many disputed areas that are very high in potential.
But I guess because you said by 2024, the whatever gas that will come out of Malampay will be good enough for 1,000 megawatts. Then there is no point for, again, no, this is off top lang to, for government to, I mean, there is no point for government not to extend because konti na lang makukuha doon, eh.
Yes, sir. But when it comes to revenues, if it is 100% government already, because you can outsource the expert, the dividends, the revenues that has to go to the national government will be a lot bigger now on that one. Because ngayon, sir, it's 10% only. So maybe malit nga siya pero 100% naman kung government to government.
What's a timetable, Yusek? When will you decide whether the concession will be extended or not?
So we're looking at 2020.
2020, 2 years
I
from
have to come up with the recommendations, sir, at 2019. Of course, the good secretary will have to also validate all those recommendations and do some due diligence in order to come up with.
We'll hear some feedback later on from Shell regarding this, well, because in my opinion, the best case scenario is we can still find or extend the life of the current well, no, and significantly supply the 3,400 megawatts. At least we don't have to. At least we will minimize uncertainty, no, for a few more years. So that's the best case scenario. But we'll hear from Shell later on. And then another USEC or Director Abad, the TPA. Can you elaborate further the TPA concept, the third-party access concept? This is actually the proponents are quite interested in the policy of the TPA, no? Because ano ba ang limitation ng isang developer dito, no? So we have to understand that also.
Well, simply put, sir, the owner of the facility, it's an awfully big investment requirement for. There is a need for, $1 billion, hovering around $1 billion, for example, that not all investors can actually put up a terminal, for example. And but to increase the liquidity, meaning the users, the traders, those that actually can utilize the gas need not put up its own facility, regas facility. What would you do is to actually pay the owner of the regas, operator of the regas plant, to actually process the gas for you. So what you pay now is just the fee for that service. So this is the so-called third-party access. So it is not just the owner and the operator who actually contract directly with the big. The owner or operator usually contracts with the big ticket projects like power plants. But CNG buses, for example, could be a good non-power use. But owner of fleet of buses who would like to use gas would not necessarily build its own regas terminal, but rather just get the gas, process the gas through the operator. But that owner of the fleet of the bus can actually pay the regas operator. So that's the whole idea of a third-party access. But of course, we have to provide a code for that because of the negotiation terms, the parameters on how to avoid overpricing, for example, and monopoly, for example. So we have to create a code for that, which would lay down the process and the principles behind how negotiations will be outlined. Those codes are now present, for example, in UK, in Thailand, in Singapore, in Malaysia.
Assume, Director, itong third-party access, the true spirit of the third-party access is really to spur competition, correct? No, ito talaga yan, no? I mean,
Dumami po ang players.
exactly, no? This is really to spur competition, no? And what are the limitations? No? For example, you said here excess capacity of LNG terminal, transmission system, distribution system. So, nagkahiwalay-hiwalay siya.
Usually,
What is
sir,
the concept that you are envisioning in this? The terminal owner should be different with the transmission system owner in different, ganyan ba how do you envision that?
sir, yung system kasi, you can actually design an installed capacity, but for the meantime that the demand, for example, from power would only be around 50%.
Okay.
Meaning you have an excess of processing capacity of around 50%. Now, you don't just stop and, settle down with the 50% now ongoing demand use for that facility. You can actually talk to other non-power, for example, demand and aggregate them. Maybe they could actually come up with another 30% for that demand. They can use the facility for that. So in other words, that's the excess of the own use or the direct contract, the bilateral contract of the operator. But in fact, in other countries, they open it up for 100% because they're now the service is now being bidded out.
That's my next question. Bakit excess capacity lang? Why not completely open it up?
Well,
If
actually,
you want
open
true
up naman yan.
competition, then why not open it up?
Mag-open naman po yan, sir.
Kasi excess capacity, minsan, ibig sabihin, unahin ko muna bago iba eh.
Yes, the
Diba?
premium, sir, na yun kasi is the power demand. That's the only premium that we are actually putting an emphasis on because we need power of the 43,000 megawatt demand that we're actually would like to have around 2040. But we can go from that and even beyond. So we just have to create the liquidity, create the market, develop it, and make it sustainable so it can pay actually for the right amount of service that a regas operator could actually take on to survive also.
What this means is very simple. Anyone can use the facility of anyone, correct? Babayad ka lang ng throughput or tolling, no? That's the concept here. But what you're saying, unahin ko muna yung sarili ko, no? Bago yung iba, correct? That's why excess capacity.
Is that,
Oh, but you'll also survive them. You'll be charging throughput and tolling fee, no? But my point here is, if we are envisioning true competition, no, as the spirit of this proposal, then why not open it up to everyone from day one? For example, may power plant ako. Meron ako nakausap na supplier, let's say in Australia. Gusto ko mag-import. Paano kung hindi ako i-pare-gasify? No? Diba? Then you limit competition.
Yeah, actually, sir,
in that case.
actually, I
no?
think the term is not excess capacity. Actually, sir, the first design kasi, maybe the available kasi sir, the actual first pace of this project is a 500 million metric tons per annum. And you need to supply this 3,400 demand, sir, megawatts demand. And that's around 3,400 also, or 3,300 million tons per annum. So, I think what Director Rino is pertaining to is the 1,700 that is not currently on the market. So, meaning, open, sir, anybody can put up a power plant and then contracted it or talk to the LNG terminal operator, and then they have the full
That's
access.
our interpretation of the third party. Our interpretation is only excess capacities will be opened up to third party access.
No, sir. Actually, the whole is the third-party access because we don't allow, in this PNGR, in this Philippine Natural Downstream Regulation, we don't allow own use permit. We only grant third-party access permit. So, the competition and the transparency is there, sir.
All right. Thank you, Yusek. And another thing, no, in this case, who will be issuing the permit? And who will be the regulator?
The OM, sir. With coordination with the RC, nandun po sa PDNGR.
Hindi ba conflict of interest yun?
Di naman, sir, kasi we will not do into venturing, into partnership. So, ang amin talaga is just permitting and regulations. But, dyan po sa PDNGR, nakalagay po, regulations in coordination with the ERC.
I saw that in coordination with the ERC, but again, no, looking at the whole department circular, I think we're in the regime, we're in the policymaker is a different entity from the regulator, solely because the primary reason for that is to really avoid conflict of interest, no? Because ikaw ay nag-i-issue ng policy, tapos ikaw rin nagre-regulate dun sa policy, no? Especially when it comes to pricing, no? Because pricing is also a very touchy subject, no? This is where, that's why one of the outputs of this hearing is really to elicit information from you and suggestions on how to move forward with a concrete legislation that will be the overall guiding framework of this industry. No? This industry is such a vast and large industry that I think it needs the stability of legislation to guide it. No? That's why I'm just pointing out what we see might be potential conflict of interest. It might be weaknesses, no, in the framework of the downstream natural gas industry, no? And we're open to working with you in terms of putting that framework, no, Yusek.
And adding to that, also your Mr. Chairman, like oil and it is a deregulated product. So we are now in the process of coming up with the department circular of unbundling the price. So with this, the approach also is to be transparent, and unbundled prices should be also disclosed in this transaction.
Thank you, Yusek. We have a lot of private sector guests this afternoon, and we'll start talking to the private sector resource persons. We start with Shell, Don, and please give us some of your thoughts and some of your and some updates, no, regarding the Malampaya gas field.
Yeah. So good afternoon, Honorable Senator, and good afternoon to the panel. Yeah. So I'm Don Polino, I'm Managing Director for Shell Philippines Exploration, and been part of the Malampaya Consortium for the last 16 years. Yeah. So just before I give a full update, I just want to share to the panel and to the committee that as a consortium, we're really committed to continue to be partners with the government in providing indigenous gas supply, and at the same time maximizing the reservoir that we have right now in Malampaya. And just want to share that that great partnership continue to happen, especially with the Department of Energy. And to date has a partners what we have given the government in its 60% share. So I'm not sure if everybody's aware that 60% of the revenue coming out of Malampaya actually goes to the government. This does not include the 10% share that PNOC gets. So overall, the government gets roughly 64% of the overall revenue. And if our calculations is right, we're hitting around July, almost the $10 billion mark. So really quite a lot of revenue for the government coming out of the Malampaya activities that we actually do. And this is on top of the energy provision to the country, which is roughly 25 to 30% of the supply. Now, just want to support the DOE in some of the calculations. So we continue to work closely with them. On our assessment, we see the reservoir lasting around between 2027 to 2029, depending on the demand in the next coming years. We also see opportunities that we can continue to provide between 60% to 100% of the current demand from a natural gas perspective from 2022 onwards. Yeah. And whilst it's quite difficult for us to actually continues with some of the opportunities that we might have because of the stability in the current investment climate, we see also opportunities within the near field to at least a bit manage some of the uncertainties that we have, provided I think it's a timing issue dealing with the stability that we have in the investment climate, plus from a technical perspective, start doing some of the exploration in the near future. Yeah. So I think I'll stop with that. Yeah.
Don, thank you. You mentioned earlier now that there's a possibility that the wells might extend up to 2029, correct? And do you have, I'm sure you have a forecast, no, on from 2022, which is the start of the depletion. What is the forecast in terms of output of that well? No?
So right now we have 7 wells. The good thing about the Malampaya reservoir, its behavior, if I just say it from a geophysical perspective, is aligned to the model that we have. So it's behaving based on the model that we have. So what we're seeing against those 7 wells is that we will continue to provide. So if I just step back, Senator, we've actually started the decline as early as 2015. So what has happened in 2015 is that the reservoir started declining, but what we did as a Malampaya joint venture together with the government to arrest the decline is we've installed what you call a depletion compressor. And what it did was actually bring back the capacity to almost its original level. What the depletion compressor will do is actually give us quite a large capacity and recover around 80% of the reservoir until around 2027, 2029 period.
And do you have, I'm sure you ran simulations, no? And right now I understand that the capacity of those 7 wells is 380 million standard cubic feet per day.
So the production that
the production.
So the production that we have, Senator, is between, depending on the day, it's between around 450 to almost 500 million scuffs a day. So it's so what we have done as a joint venture to actually help support the government's drive to energy sufficiency. We've actually looked in the past couple of years how to further make the system efficient. So that's why we were able to increase the capacity of our production from the 380 you quoted to roughly around 470, 500 million scuffs. And that is really to help and support the the Philippine energy requirement, because we believe that by having indigenous gas has a good source, we are actually making sure that the consumer also get the right price. Yeah.
You said earlier also that it's starting to deplete.
Yes, sir.
No? And kailan natin makikita yung significant
Okay.
na depletion? No? At what point?
So
Do we see a depletion wherein then it's a trigger that we should get imported natural gas to come in?
So what we're seeing has an opportunity is around, similar to what Yusek Marcos has mentioned, it's around 2022. That's the period where potentially we could have some ullage in the system to power up some of the natural gas-fired power plants. Yeah. Using LNG. Yeah.
And we cannot, there's no more possibility of extracting more gas in that area?
Within the portfolio, sir, within SC38, there are some options. I mean, Yusek Marcos have mentioned about Malampaya East. That could be a bridge to enable us to actually fill in that 2022 period, maybe even up to 2025, 2027.
So hindi rin ganun kahaba?
Yes, sir. I think it will be a very short bridge.
So in other words, SC38 is fully exhausted?
Based on what we're seeing now.
Okay.
So, but with technology, with further exploration, maybe we can see something different.
Right, but as of this point, it's prudent to say that SC38 has been completely exhausted.
Yeah, we're maximizing it.
You're maximizing it already. All right. Okay. All right. I will veer away from talking about the issue with COA. I think on a separate session, we'll deal with that. No, what we want to establish now is really the direction of the natural gas industry. Anything you want to add, pa?
Nothing
Don?
anymore,
All
sir.
right. So you can contribute naman as we go along.
Okay.
Right.
Thank you.
And then we want to hear from the other private proponents. Energy World, I think, is one of the pioneers in this natural gas industry, and we want to hear Mr. Elliott, your experiences and from a private sector perspective, what are the things that government should do to spur this industry, and what are the challenges that you are facing also?
Good afternoon. Good afternoon, Honorable Chairman, Senator Gatilian. Thank you very much for inviting us and allowing us to participate in this hearing. We do have a presentation that I would like to take you through if I can, which...
You can show us the presentation, but...
I'll go quite quickly through it.
Yes, make it quite brief.
I'll be as brief as possible, but whilst they're getting that ready, to give everyone some background, Energy World Corporation actually began developing a liquefied natural gas hub terminal and power project here in the Philippines. We originally wrote to the president in 2005. We worked with the Department of Energy in 2010 to get our permits. Sorry, well, I can hear that's better. And we were given our permit to get on and build the hub terminal in 2010, at which point we started work. The hub terminal is mostly complete. It has an anchor power station with a capacity of 650 megawatts, combined cycle gas turbine power station. We are still waiting to finalize some connection arrangements, which is what's held up the project. But I can hopefully take you through it quickly, but they need to just... We'll get there in a second. Where's the clicker, Diana? Just flash through it quite quickly. I can talk to it as you go. Okay. So the Energy World Group, spearheaded actually by my father, Mr. Stuart Elliott, who first came and developed power projects in the Philippines back in the early 1990s. We put up Navotas 1 and 2. We built the large coal-fired power stations at Pagbalao and Sual. We took over the operation and maintenance of the National Power Corporation power barges at that time. And now we've come back to build a liquefied natural gas terminal and power station. So over our history, we've built over 3,000 megawatts of power, and we have invested over $3 billion in the Philippines. So as a group, the company goes all the way from exploration, production, processing, liquefaction of natural gas, shipping, hub terminals, and power generation. And really, we've adopted the Department of Energy's slide, and we give them credit wherever we go around the world, because we've adopted their plan as our business plan, which is to bring either domestic or imported natural gas as a clean and economical fuel for power, industry, residential, and commercial users, both in the Philippines, in Indonesia, Australia, other countries where we work. As we know, electricity is the main demand driver for liquefied natural gas. At the moment, the Philippines is on about 650 kilowatt hours per person. To grow the GDP of the nation, to grow the wealth of the nation, you have to keep up with the electricity demand. And as the DOE has already said, that equates to about 40,000 megawatts of new generation. And that's an enormous number to keep up with, which is why, as an investor, we're incredibly excited to work in the Philippines, because there's a massive demand. To answer some of your questions to the Department of Energy, LNG infrastructure doesn't have to be expensive. The project we've put up in Pagbalao, with all of the marine jetty, all of the tank, all of the associated facilities and regasification, the cost's around 130 to 150 million US dollars. The liquefaction facility we've built in Indonesia, which gives you 2 million tons per annum capacity, is about 350 million US dollars. Now, that's because we're a owner, operator, developer, and contractor. If PNOC wants me to do it, I'll charge them $1 billion quite happily, but you'd be having a Senate inquiry as to where it went. And this then speaks to your cost of electricity generation, which is by far what we feel the most important, because the power station we've developed at Pagbalao is a merchant power station. We have not secured and do not intend to secure any offtake agreements. The policy that we read at the time that we made the investment was clean energy and merchant power plants. So all capacity will be sold through the wholesale spot market in the Philippines. Yeah, we might suffer in the beginning, but that's the policy of the government. We've got project financing from Land Bank and DBP, which are the policy banks of the government, so we will follow that policy. And that way we believe we can help drive down the electricity price in the Philippines, because the price here is too high. It's a cost comparison. The electricity generation on baseload operation will be less than coal. Anywhere else, we can generate for about 30 to 40% less than diesel. So you have a cleaner fuel, better for the environment, and it's more economical. So this is why we've gone ahead with the investment. We've put up the tanks, we've put up the jetties, we've put up the power station, and we're pushing as hard as we can to get the project finished so we can get into operation. As you can see from the location at Pagbalao in Quezon Province, as you can see, the tank is up, the jetty is built. We actually even have our own LNG ship. She arrived in January to the Philippines last year, but because of delays to the projects, we've had to put her in layup, so she's waiting to deliver LNG. The power station is up, the switchyard is going up. You know, the construction, welding of the pipes, it's all going on at the moment. Secretary of Energy Kusi visited the site, and it was at that time that he said, wow, I've been told this project's not real, but it is real. You know, he's a mechanical engineer, he understands the gas turbines, and there he is seeing them. We've also had other VIPs, and you know, this speaks a little bit to why we got delayed, because it's always an issue, and you know, the answer to that honestly is we're waiting on the new Pagbalao substation, which we built by NGCP. When we signed the connection agreement in 2015, it was anticipated that that substation would be available in 2016. As of today, they have not yet secured the land fully, is our understanding, and according to their latest plans, that substation will be available in 2019. So, you know, we've got a power station sitting there, but We could connect 200 megawatts now, but the capacity is 650, but we just can't take it out. Future developments. As I said, we're positive about the LNG industry and the gas industry in the Philippines. What we would like to see is LNG from Pagbalao, and we fully intend in the future to increase both the power generation and also the storage at the site. Each one of those tanks that we're putting up is 130,000 cubic meters of LNG. That can support 3,000 megawatts of power generation. So we'd like to take the site up to about 3,000 megawatts, but we'd go up to 4 storage tanks, which means there's 9,000 megawatts of gas equivalent that can be exported or transported around the rest of the Philippines. Obviously, pipelines, it's time to build a pipeline to Manila. If we build it on approximately this route, we can pick up the Malaya power station, the Sucat power station. These can be repowered from diesel to natural gas. The transmission infrastructure is already there, so the cost of putting in new equipment is much lower, so the capital cost is low, the fuel cost is low, which gives us low electricity prices at the end of the day, especially if we can drive everyone into a market system where the lowest cost goes to the consumer. We can also put up a pipeline to Batangas. I mean, the pipeline cost will be about $180 million roughly. That'll give you 3,000 megawatts of supply. We'd like to see that pipeline happen because even if they go ahead and put up a terminal at Batangas, it can become a bidirectional pipeline and it becomes an energy security issue to make sure that if one facility ever goes down because of an accident or something like that, you can still shift the energy around the country. We're looking at infrastructure corridors. Obviously we have to build pipelines, we have to build transmission networks. Let's maximize everything that we can going through that corridor. This just goes through a little bit on the different kinds of shipping. As I said, we already have our own LNG tanker dedicated to the project. We're looking at developing small ships with floating storage so that we can develop around the Philippines. Fuel bunkering is going to be incredibly important because lots of ships around the world are moving to LNG. As we all know, the Philippines supplies many of the seafarers around the world. So by focusing on LNG bunkering in the Philippines can become a center of excellence where those seamen are higher trained, can be higher paid, and have better jobs around the rest of the world because they already have the experience and knowledge in LNG. Just a little bit on satellite terminals. As the DOE was saying, for your smaller area power stations, this is actually a power station in Australia that we've run for about the last 20 years. It's fueled on LNG. We produce the LNG in Alice Springs. We send it by truck 600 kilometers, and the power station in Australia is 8 megawatts. It's economical to run and produces power at about that 5 to 6 cent mark, US cents. I mean, that's 5 to 6 US cents we showed earlier is less than 3 pesos per kilowatt hour. So this around the Philippines as a starting point to start getting electrification, you're replacing diesel fuel or heavy fuel again with a cleaner and more economical fuel source, and the fuel is the largest component of the power bill. As the DOE would like to see, we'd like to see LNG fueling stations, LNG and CNG. LNG fuel is fantastic for municipal vehicles, heavy trucks, long-haul vehicles, and the CNG is good for short-haul vehicles, taxis, and things like that. Then we talk a little bit about offshore and onshore. We've standardized building the plants. That's how we can do it economically. We'd like to put up 3 different terminals in Mindanao. We'd start with about 450 megawatts. We'd go up to 900 megawatts. In Cebu, we'd like to put up 1 or 2 plants. But then this is where it gets exciting again, because we're also involved in the exploration space. And this is a future project, but it's one that should really be on the horizon. Because in the Sulu area, in the Sulu Sea, there's a lot of gas that's been discovered, but it hasn't been utilized. And we're in discussions with local partners in that area to put up a petroleum park and to put up a facility that will bring together these explored areas and wells where they've had findings of gas. We can bring that by pipeline ashore in the same way that Malampaya does, but there isn't a big demand in Sulu, so we can build a liquefaction plant there. And that liquefaction plant can then start supplying LNG throughout the Philippines. So again, you're using domestic gas to power the country, and you're doing it in an economical way. We're on to Batangas. Yeah, so we've presented to the Department of Energy and to PNOC as well, the concept of putting the pipeline to Batangas to help them reach that short-term goal of having LNG. And it's a relatively short process. It's 180 it's 100 kilometers of pipeline. The Malampaya pipe's already 500 kilometers, so it's something they can do in the Philippines very easily, relatively economical, and it covers your gas supply. So that's about it. So we're excited about the industry. We're happy that LNG is economical because we're going to go to the wholesale market. So we're already putting up the project, and I think you've already got a gas future. So thank you.
Mr. Elliott, you mentioned earlier that the project started in 2010. Is that correct?
Correct. That was when we got our Department of Energy permit.
And that's when you started the earth-moving construction in 2010.
Correct.
And I understand also there is a power station in that facility.
Correct. There's a 650 megawatt combined cycle power station.
Ready to operate.
The first 200 megawatts, there's 2 gas turbines. Each one is 200 megawatts. The gas turbines are on site, installed, and are within about 4 to 6 months from being operational.
Okay. And the receiving terminal is also, from the pictures I saw, it seems to me that the receiving terminal is ready constructed.
The marine facilities are all constructed and ready. The tank is constructed. There is some internal lining of the tank with a specialized membrane that holds the LNG, and it's the same kind of membrane that goes in the LNG tanker ships. But even if we had to expedite it, the ship that we have can act as a floating storage and regas during the time being.
So when can you start injecting power into the grid? When is it going to be commercially functional?
When we can finalize the connection through the new Pagbalao substation.
Which is the Pagbalao. So the constraint now is the Pagbalao substation.
The constraint to being fully operational is the new Pagbalao substation. And quite frankly, as we've looked at the investment coming forward, yes, we have an ability to build a 14-kilometer transmission line, and we have secured the right-of-way over that transmission line with a local land agreement. Until we have certainty that the substation is going to be built there, we can't go ahead and buy all the land and the right-of-way, because if the substation gets moved, we've made a bit of an error.
But basically the substation is the only thing that is missing in terms of commercially operating this plant.
Correct.
Okay. And in your experience, Mr. Elliott, it seems to me out of all the proponents here, you're the most advanced, no? Just by looking at the pictures, you've invested a significant amount of money, time, and effort. What are the challenges that you encountered in terms of putting up this plant, and what do you suggest? No, you've seen that I would assume when you started putting up this plant, there was no downstream regulation yet, no? So based on your experience, what do you suggest in terms of developing the downstream natural gas industry?
So there was actually regulation in place with the Department of Energy, which we have followed, and we've actually been, especially through Engineer DeBao, been integral with helping to develop some of the new rules and regulations that have come along. And a lot of those are based on the challenges that we had with the plant at Pagbalao. I would say the biggest problem we've had is the connection. Obviously, as I said, power generation is the driver for bringing LNG in, and that's held up the project. That's held up our ability to get project financing, because banks are very nervous about, if you haven't got a connection in the Philippines, they don't want to release funding. And there's an interesting thing, obviously, where, as you said earlier, that you're governed by a department that's circular. So although the permit from the DOE says they are the only agency able to permit the construction and operation of an LNG terminal, yes, you still need to get your local building permit, which means for every single thing you have to go back to the barangay captain, and he has to say yes, it's okay, and the mayor has to say yes, it's okay, and et cetera, et cetera. So that's been a challenge, but everybody's got to do that. So at the moment, it's a fair and level playing field. And as you can see, we've just gone on and done it. So we in many ways feel that there is a huge demand for clean energy, and if somebody can come and deliver that clean energy at an economical price, which we're convinced that we can do, frankly, this is a gold mine, and that's why we're doing it. So everyone would like it to be easier, but it's not impossible already. The ability is there. I mean,
So from your Mr. Elliott, you're quite satisfied with the framework and the regulations that were put in place. You don't see, aside from the typical red tape, no, which will be addressed by EO 30. No, you're quite satisfied with the regulations and the processes in place.
yes, quite satisfied.
Okay, all right. It's good to hear. I'd like to ask Yusek again, no? Yusek Marcos, what are the incentives, or how are we inviting these potential proponents to build or to start off an LNG downstream industry? What are the incentives, or what are the things that the department is doing to attract these investors?
First of all, sir, it is included in the Bureau of Investment priority incentives. And of course, sir, coming up with the market or the demand already will encourage the investor to do the project. Because, sir, in one of the provision of the PDNGR, you have to identify your captive market. Meaning, if there is somebody who get already the permit and do the project, there's no other investor that will be allowed or will be granted permit for that specific area, because it will the DOE, the Department of Energy, really wants a commercial viability of the project. So if they are interested to invest on LNG again, then they have to identify another place and come up with a market study, identify their own market, and then they will be allowed again. So with the current demand, sir, which is the 3,400, it is already encouraging for an investor to put up an LNG integrated terminal, considering also the third-party accessibility of that, because you're going to, of course, ultimately develop the market down to the households, transport, commercials, and industries.
You said from your knowledge, what is the minimum capacity for a proponent to be economically viable?
So
For
actually,
example, if they want to put a receiving terminal, regasification, onshore regasification, what's the minimum capacity that?
sir, actually, it will be depending on the market that you will have to identify. Meaning,
Okay.
in this certain place in Batangas, you have already a 3,400 captive market. Meaning, sir, you have to study your business model to be feasible and to be economically viable, targeting on that market. So if you identified another market, say for instance in Visayas, and your captive market is about 1,000 megawatt, then you have to design your own LNG terminal based on its commercial viability. So the return should be also put in consideration, because definitely you have to come up with a financial closing and coming up with a project.
The 3,400 is in Batangas, eh? Correct?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
So, meaning their only market now, or the sole market in the Philippines, is located in Batangas.
In Batangas, sir. But there are some proposals, sir, in somewhere in Visayas, sir, in Mindanao.
Okay.
Yes, sir, for their own LNG terminal. Some propose for an FSR UPP, a floating station gasification unit with power plant, and targeting some other local industries there. They have already agreements, sir.
Yeah.
Well, I don't have to disclose the company, sir, but they have offer already. We have finished the pre-conference application meeting, pre-application conference meeting, sir. So
it's a pre-application.
yes, sir.
It's not a pre-bid.
No, sir, pre-application,
Okay.
sir. Pre-application conference, wherein you iron out all your concerns, you raise your issues and gaps that you're foreseeing.
So naturally, because Batangas is the biggest market, naturally the proponents will be attracted to locate in that area.
Yes, sir, but there are some who are interested also in
Outside,
Mindanao.
oo.
Say, in
But
Mindanao, sir.
in Batangas, what is the policy there? No? Are you allowing unlimited applicants?
Yes, sir.
So there's no...
It's a level playing field, sir, with the of course, with the highest regards on accountability and transparency.
Okay.
Level playing field, but we avoid flippers and we avoid those not serious investors. So it's really a first come first serve basis. So the financial compliance with or the financial closing is really much needed in this project. So it's a race, sir. It's
Okay.
a first come first serve race.
So in other words, I saw in this briefer that you sent me, there are 10 applicants, no?
Yes,
And
sir.
assuming lang, no? Assuming all 10 are financially capable, technically capable, is there a potential all of them will be given the permit to
No, sir.
construct?
No, sir. Definitely, because the first one who get the financial closing and all the compliance will definitely get the project.
And then the rest is...
Yes, sir. It's a first come first serve
Yeah,
basis.
but what is the... that's why I'm trying to understand. No? But what is the limitation there? What is the limiting factor? Because that's why I wanted to understand, for a facility to be economically viable, what is the minimum capacity? No? Because that will dictate, I would assume, how many proponents will come in. No? But having said that, why are we also limiting the number of proponents coming in if they will be the one taking the risk?
Yes, sir. We are not limiting, sir, the applicants. Actually, it's 10 and counting, sir. And, Mr. Chair, the very main reason is that to assure the commercial viability of the project. Otherwise, if we issue permit to one investor, which is compliance in all aspects, and then we issue another one, so meaning the commercial viability of the project will be affected. That's why they need to identify another place and then identify his own market.
For example, all of these proponents will have different capacities. So when you approve one, what is the capacity? What is the minimum capacity?
Sir, it's a 5 million metric tons per annum. That's included in the first phase of the project, which will address. You cannot build a capacity that will not satisfy the current market situation.
So you will only approve a project if it's minimum of 5 million metric tons per annum.
Yes, sir. It is included in the business model and the profile that they have
So
and
kung
in the
lahat
concept.
below 5 million, out na siya.
Yes, sir.
Out na siya.
Yes, sir.
So
Kaya,
5
sir, doon sa
million,
Visayas, mas maliit ang market pa, and they had to identify some possible growth in the market demands. So doon, mag-identify sila according to the design. Kanya-kanya self-presentation ng profile and concept.
Right.
Opo. So with this, considering the 3,400 is already there, so we are eyeing, yung sinasabi niya kaninang excess capacity. Actually, it's not excess capacity. It's 5 million metric tons. You have to consume the 3,400. The 1,600 is also open for third-party access.
But by limiting the number of players, you're creating a monopoly.
Sir, we're not actually limiting the number because it's open. It's a level playing
But
field.
you will only give one permit to construct.
Yes, sir, because
The application is open, pero the permit to construct will only be given to one entity.
yes, sir, kasi iniwasan nga namin, sir, dito yung flipper, yung pag kinuha yung project, kinuha yung permit, bebenta lang or ano lang. So naapektuhan, sir, yung momentum ng project to have it realized the soonest possible time. We are looking at maybe this year or the early next year, it has to be groundbreaker.
Okay.
And there are very many aggressive players, sir, investors right now.
Well, my point there is we're inadvertently we're creating a monopoly because we're only allowing one entity to construct and to supply. In effect, he will now control the terminal. He will now control the supply, and what if other proponents will have a better technology, a cheaper supplier? Diba? Di ba mas maganda laban-laban kayo? Basta you're technically capable, you're financially capable. If you want to bear the risk, so be it. Bahala ka na. Kasi kanya-kanyang, ano yan eh, kanya-kanyang strength eh. No? I saw some of your proponents here, like First Gen, it's a big company. No? Tokyo Gas is a big company. China National Offshore Oil Corporation. I'm very sure that they have their own proprietary strength and proprietary strategy. No? So my point is, why are we limiting it to one? You know, creating a virtual monopoly, and in effect that might again, no, at the end, at sa dulo nito, pinakadulo ng value chain is really the consumer. No? In effect, the consumer might be inadvertently be penalized in just limiting it to one entity.
Actually, Mr. Chair, I think if I may, Mr. Chair.
Yes,
when we were developing this, we had to look at two different things. One thing that we had to look at was how do we meet the requirement of ensuring a reliable gas supply for the power plants that are receiving gas or natural gas from Malampaya. So that's one issue. The other issue is how to develop a nascent natural gas industry in the Philippines. Just to be clear, Mr. Chair, the objective really was not to create a monopoly, but instead the objective was to make sure that anybody who comes in and applies for the permits to be issued by the Department of Energy would have one, at least the initial one, would meet that requirement of providing that supply, and then two, that it would survive. So, parang Mr. Chair, parang the way we were envisioning it, if a player comes in and he identified his market, and his market would be, say, the existing available supply, the available power generation in Batangas, and then somebody comes in and he identified his own market, then of course we'll also allow it if he's also technically and legally feasible. But if he will pose a threat to the commercial viability of that first project, then we would have to step in and protect that, precisely because it might pose a danger to that reliability. The challenge really of the Department of Energy, Mr. Chair, is to balance those interests. The concern of the Secretary really is to ensure that masasatisfy po yung 3,000 megawatt supply. So we did not design it to create or to establish a monopoly. It's just that the reality is once that first initial available supply right now, yung captive market, has been identified, then if a applicant already has agreements with that group of companies or with that group of power plants, then we don't expect somebody else to come in and apply. So.
Sir, you know, it becomes also self-sustaining, not only to limit the discussion on the fuel supply. We're just talking here about the fuel supply. I mean, the demand would also, in a way, take care of itself in terms of the competition, having the competitive price. Because the user, for example, of Meralco, will have to bid out. And the power using the fuel, LNG, has to bid. Also, in other words, it does not end up the story of the issue on competitiveness on the level of the fuel. So, as mentioned by ASEC Pulido, it's really a way of balancing how to actually start off a new LNG, a new industry. But we know for a fact that through the system, before it ends up at the hands or at the level of the consumer, there are actual competitiveness measures that are now being put in place or are actually being implemented through the IPERA, for example, and through circulars. For example, recently we have a department circular requiring all electric cooperatives and distribution utilities to go into bidding, competitive selection process. So it is not that easy also for a fuel like an operator of LNG to say that assured na po yung presyo na gusto mo. Hindi po, dadaan pa rin the user will have to to bid for that demand from the distribution utilities.
But again, this brings me, what is the minimum capacity for an operator or an investor to make it viable?
Sir, from the discussions of the pre-application conferences, almost all pointed out to around 200 megawatt. But then again, as mentioned by Yusek Marcos,
So 200 you're saying to be economically viable, you need to have a minimum of capacity of 200
but
megawatt.
of course, in the end, you really have to consider the capacity of what you intend to produce.
Yeah,
And
let's take that 200 megawatt as an example. You're saying para sa isang proponent to be economically viable, at least I have to have the capacity to supply 200 megawatt power plant, correct?
that would be, sir, for the so-called FSRU type of.
Right. I understand. And then ilan ang demand for natural gas? 3,200, correct? Diba?
Kasi mga
3,200,
equivalent
correct?
lang, sir, 3.4 would need around 3.5 MTPA. So, i-divide lang natin 200.
No, let's do the simple math.
Yes.
200 yung minimum.
Oh.
The demand is 3,200. And then you're only giving it to one entity to supply the 3,200. And well, in fact, at 200, bawi na siya.
Sir,
You see what
you
I'm
have to
driving at?
design, if you
So,
design.
ibig sabihin, beyond 200, from 200 to 3,200 is already super gravy.
Kaya lang, sir, on land na kasi pag ganyang kalaki,
No, I'm just doing simple math. I'm trying to understand why limit it to one entity. That's what I'm driving at. If we don't know the minimum capacity to make it economically viable, then we have no basis to limit it to one entity. Diba? On another point, is it correct to say that this is a purely deregulated industry? It's a deregulated industry, correct? And then why are we regulating it? Why are we regulating the supply of natural gas coming in?
Actually, sir, the aspiration of the Department of Energy is really included in the phase 2 also. It's a phase 1, phase 2 project, meaning the Philippines to be a potential hub of the region. So, if it will be on approach of that very detail, I think the third-party access permit will not, or the on-use permit, meaning sir, lahat ng power plant mag-a-apply ng sarili ng permit. So, our aspirations of coming up as also on the phase 2 as an energy hub and coming up advancing the market or multiplying the project, the market down to the consumer, down to the household, down to the commercial, industrial. So mawawala yung approach ng business model pag nag 200 ka lang, sir. At saka, sir, imbis na may kumuhan 200, yung lahat ng power plant existing doon will just apply their own permit, their own use permit, which is not included in the PDNGR. Tapos po, sir, yun nga po, sir, the aspiration, it was even brought out to the to Philippine-Japan economic and infrastructure cooperation, that one of the aspiration is to have this LNG integrated receiving terminal and later on as a hub in the region.
Mr. Chair, if I may add to that, we would just like to clarify some of the concepts as well. It's deregulated, Mr. Chair, in the sense that there is no law that authorizes the Department of Energy to regulate the prices of liquefied natural gas. However, there are laws and there are catch-all provisions in the existing laws and regulations that allow the Department of Energy to regulate the participation of the private sector in energy projects. And that's what we're trying to fill in, Mr. Chair, those gaps po, kasi nga po, wala nga po tayong existing legislation.
Attorney, what you're doing is economic regulation, which is, I think, beyond the ambit of the DOE, no? Especially in this industry where it's purely deregulated. Again, no, I'm trying to understand and appreciate why limited to one player, where in fact, borrowing your numbers, you will only need 200 megawatt capacity to make it economically viable. That's my. I'm trying to understand the logic in terms of limiting it to.
Mr. Chair, if I may, we need to clarify the 200. That is only based on the discussions with during the pre-application conferences, and they are actually used in a specific technology, which is FSRU. But it does not hold true in all cases. So in this case, we're talking about 3,400 megawatts. So
when you said earlier, your vision is to only allow one player to operate, correct?
Sir, the idea of you applicants designing your facility must be appropriate or equivalent to the demand that you are defining.
But you're only allowing one.
Not necessarily, sir. Not necessarily.
Okay,
because
for Batangas.
You have to define. In other words, you have to define the market. If you take on the 3,400 megawatt, and that would entail around 3.5 to 5 MTPA, then you have to raise a bigger capital for that, and bigger capital would be with a higher risk of investing, and you get the price of having a big business later on. So, but if someone else applies for another market and it defines another set of market like EWC, we will not prevent him doing his own LNG regas terminal. But again, I go back to what Yusek Marcos has said. Really, it would be in a way it will be very costly if we keep on encouraging terminal after terminal after terminal. So we have to have the economies of scale also. If we can create a centralized, for example, terminal, and you can maximize the economies of scale of this terminal and provide gas for different users, then in the end you end up having actually an optimized price, rather than keep on receiving applications and allowing building regas terminal from point to point in uncontrolled areas at different parts of the country. Then it will end up, if you don't design it to the extent that you also intervene on the economic side, the feasibility side, the sustainability side, then it would be irresponsible also on the side of the department to.
A simple example dito sa Batangas, wherein all the off-takers are there. No, ilan ang ma-approve sa Batangas?
Someone will actually take on the
I would assume all
3,400.
of these are looking at Batangas, eh.
If someone, sir, would take
Except
on,
for Energy World, but all of them are looking at Batangas, I would assume. No?
if someone will take on the 3,400 with the proof and conclusion of a financial closing, then why not?
Isa lang
Sir,
isa lang ang ma-approve sa Batangas.
Again, sir, it's also part of what we call the deregulation.
Yeah, but when
You
you
don't
say
control
approve
also the
lang in
applications.
Batangas area,
We can, sir. We can approve another if he so desire to put up and again design his own market.
yes, oo.
If I want to put up
Bahala na siya.
another 1,000 megawatt,
Pwede
it's
yun.
allowed. Yes.
Pwede yan. So, and again nga, they can put up, it's not limited to one. Okay, let's make clarify, kasi may mga proponents, because I also want to appreciate this, eh. We're not limited to one, right? So, for example, all of them, would want to put at their own risk. This is their own enterprise, and their own risk, they can be approved. That's very clear. We're not limiting it to only one player supplying Batangas. That's very. Is that a clear policy? Because I'm trying to understand the economics of limiting it to 1, as well as at the same time, I don't think it's also clear to the proponents as to why they should be limited to, or why the industry should be limited to 1. No? Is it very, hindi ko nakita yung literature on that.
So, and the regulation is very clear that they have to define their market. In fact, they have to submit a supply agreement to show the proof that that market is actually true. Kasi, for example, if you talk about first gen, if someone 5 will be applying, definitely we cannot approve them all.
We'll debate on that later on, but the basic here is assuming all of your qualifications will be satisfied, all of this can be approved. It's a basic premise.
As long as they define the specific market they will be serving, and that market will be exclusive to them. Because
and that market, when you say market, these are the off-takers.
The off-takers, yes sir.
Off-takers, regardless kung power siya or CNG or whatever.
Tama po.
If they want to create their market, bahala sila.
Okay po, tama po.
Bahala sila. Okay,
Tama po.
that's okay. That's very clear. Any
Sir, may mga nag-apply din, sir. Actually, may nag-apply na isang consortium, sir, sa Visayas, sir. So, just for the information of the body. Not only in Batangas, but there is one consortium that applied in Visayas, sir.
anyone from the private proponents who want to react to this? I want to go through the different private proponents, but if you want to react to this discussion, Alfonso, you want to, since you guys are also quite advanced, no, in terms of anything that you want to share or react to?
Thank you, sir. No, not at this time. Thank you.
The guys from First Gas, Mr. Villegas.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, Senator Gatchalian. First of all, First Gen would like to thank you for inviting us to participate in the discussions for this Senate Resolution 699. As you know, First Gen has played a major role in the Malampaya Gas to Power project, being one of the key buyers of the gas now to fuel our gas-fired power plants. And we support all efforts to further develop the industry. Now, the projected depletion of Malampaya gas field is a few years away, and we have to make investment decisions, as you pointed out, and to contract infrastructure design and construction for a viable alternative source. Now, if you look at natural gas, it really ranks high in terms of the energy trilemma, which is energy security, equity, and sustainability. And there's been some discussions early on, and I just wanted to add, weigh in on that. As far as the resource, it's significant. We, as Director Abad, the DOE has presented, it's a significant 30% of our grid. In terms of the cost competitiveness, we can say that natural gas is cost competitive now across the different operating regimes. And if you look at, and maybe we have Meralco here, if you look at the current generation cost from, if you compare Malampaya gas against coal, and it is competitive. And even moving beyond Malampaya, if you have go and transition to LNG, if you look at the market prices today, we've seen LNG increasingly becoming a commodity, wherein it is more liquid, it is more highly traded, there are more players, which indicates that this is going to be a competitive market now. We've discussed flexibility in terms of ramping up. We have our Avian, we're quite proud that we have a couple of power plants that are, I'd say, merchant basis, which we think is needed by the market if there are trips or outages of plants. We're able to ramp up pretty quickly. I think there was an incident a year ago wherein our Avion plant was up and running in 5 to 12 minutes. San Gabriel was a little bit longer, but if you take a look at the coal plants, it took some time for them to ramp up now. So you're really also looking at flexibility. The other thing that's not mentioned, and maybe it's worthwhile raising, is if you look at the market, the global trend, where you see renewables increasingly becoming, I guess, more viable, getting you would see now obviously a situation wherein, because by nature renewables are intermittent and it's only as good as when the wind blows or the sun is up, you'd also want to support the grid. So in terms of grid security, as I mentioned about the ramping up, you'd want the best complement for renewables is gas. So I won't go into details about the impact on the environment, but I think that's been well publicized, and if I talk to the people in the room, I'm preaching to the choir as far as the benefits environmentally. So undoubtedly, I think the Philippines has benefited from indigenous source now from Malampaya. But as we go towards, because the resource is finite, we're heading towards also trying to find a solution post Malampaya. And we see that LNG is a solution today, no? And I think the technology and the infrastructure that will enable us to get to these are not yet present. And we need to enable them by obviously developing an infrastructure such as an LNG terminal. Now, I think there was a discussion about the what's being done. I think the DOE has made a very good first move as far as setting the clear parameters in LNG development through the issuance of the Philippine Downstream natural gas regulation. I think it has provided clarity as far as what do we do as developers now. So it's important a measure towards regulating and putting order in this new industry. But to take to the point of the purpose or objective of this session, which is to also look at how do we enable crafting the national policy and its corresponding legislation. I think I'd like to share our own inputs to this committee. First one is the way we look at it in terms of the whole value chain of natural gas, although we're just really only a part of this whole industry, but we think that the solution should be on industry, the whole value chain perspective. So the first one is really through the exploration of new sources of indigenous fuel. So we're looking at it not just because we need to power our own gas plants, but over the long term, we must encourage this and assist the government now. The second one is introduction of new technologies and infrastructure to source, import, store, and regasify LNG. And that, as I think this has been discussed as a pain point about red tape and ventures, and I think that could be integrated and further enhance whatever policies and regulations that we have today. The third one is investment in natural gas facilities must be protected and allow the reasonable return. I think we are also, I think this big money, there's huge capital involved. I think there was a mention of $1 billion. And I think what's going to be important would be consistency as far as the incentives, the exemptions, price determination, repatriation, since there are also foreign investors in these types of transactions. We also have to deal with lenders and make sure that we also pass the smell test of lenders for us to also access capital. And then finally, clean electricity produced through natural gas must be championed by establishing probably some sort of clarity in terms of the mix of the policy. I think that's something that may be considered also by the by your committee, Senator Gatchalian. So that's it.
Thank you, Mr. Villegas. I know that First Gen is one of the bigger off-takers of natural gas. No? What do you plan to do after the Malampaya depletion?
Okay, we've started.
I saw that you're one of the proponents, no, who applied for I think for building a terminal. No? But what's your plan? Okay.
Let me take you through the history of this. When we started, we were really an off-taker buyer of the gas through our now close to or over 2,000 megawatts of gas-fired power plants. But as early as 5 or 6 years ago, way back 2012, we started to do development work as far as the LNG. Obviously, that's not our core business. We're a power generation company. But we were also looking at that 10 years, at 2012, that's like 10, 12 years from the end of our Malampayan contract. And from a development standpoint, that's not too long a period. And that we took it upon ourselves that since when we look around, there were no developments that we're seeing, and we wanted to make sure that we have a ready option. That if there was no viable alternative, that our power plants will remain or is able to continue to operate. So that was like the thinking, and I think we've put ourselves in the position, if you look at 6 years after, I think we've done a lot of activities that we feel we're in a position to be able to complete a project and deliver imported or receive imported LNG by 2024. But in any case, I think even we've been clear about this, that we're not wedded to our project, that if there's a better solution, and we're willing to look at it if there's a more, because at the end of the day, I think you've raised this, Senator, that we have to make sure that we're competitive, that the prices are low, and because this is really, the market is quite competitive on the power generation side, so any savings on any part of our cost component, and fuel is the largest, if you look at the cost component of power generation, we'd like to reduce our cost. So if someone can give a better solution, we'd definitely take a look at it. It's our obligation to the consumers, to our shareholders.
Thank you, Mr. Villegas. Attorney Rio, anything you want to?
No comment at the moment, sir.
Nothing yet. How about to Ms. Belinda of Chevron? Are you taking the same position as Shell, or you have other comments, ma'am?
No, that is correct. We're taking the position of Shell.
All right.
We're very much aligned with the operator.
Yeah, thank you. And then Mr. Jihan Go of KEPCO.
So instead of Jiango,
Hi there,
Sangje
Mr.
Choi
Jihan.
coming from KEPCO.
Any comments, anything? You're also one of the bigger off-takers of natural
sir.
gas. So what's your,
Yes, sir.
what are your plans to continue to have supply of natural gas?
Yes. Okay, as operator of the Ilian power plant, our contract will end 2020 first half. Okay, but after that period, we do not know what is the your policy of the LNG project. Okay, after 2020, can Ilian power plant can operate or not? Is there any gas can supply to the Ilian power plant? We do not know until now. So we want to clearly notice that there will be gas until that, after that time. And after that time, what will be the price and what will be the off-taking of that one. Without that kind of blueprint or the guarantees, we cannot move any further. Okay. And then we fully respect the EWC position of your big pictures of in the Philippines. We admire you. How can you push it through without any guarantees from Philippine government or without any long-term contract? Okay.
There's over 100 million Filipinos who are using more and more electricity every day.
Yeah, okay.
We know that we can generate electricity less expensively than coal. I don't see that we need a guarantee. The average Filipino paying their power bill is our guarantee.
Okay. Okay. He knows the positive position, a positive effect of this in the Philippines in terms of the growing demand of electricity. But the problem is, we have the capitals and we have the technologies, but we do not know there is a firm contract for us. That's a big problem. Or at least you should have to provide us the firm policy of your LNG project, or you have to provide us a stable market that we can find out who is our customers.
Mr. Go, when is your supply contract ending?
2022 first half.
2022.
Yes.
Exactly the same time frame as.
Yes, sir.
And assuming worst case scenario, nothing will be built. What's the option for KEPCO Ilihan?
So actually, in that case, our IPPA of Ilian Power Plant is San Miguel. We have to talk with San Miguel. What will be our next plans?
Is your plant capable of using other types of fuel?
Yes, sir, it is possible.
What type of fuel?
HFO, diesel, like that.
Diesel. So if you use diesel, then obviously it will increase prices.
Definitely, sir.
Correct?
Yes.
Okay. And this, but in San Gabriel and Avion, it's different story, no? It's purely, except
Yes.
for Santa Rita, I
Santa
think.
Rita, yeah, you're
Okay.
correct, Senator. Santa Rita and San Lorenzo can operate on multiple fuel, including various liquid fuel. But in the case of San Gabriel and Avion, San Gabriel, it can only run on natural gas.
You use the condensate, again, the obvious effect to the consumers is increase in fuel prices.
It will be higher.
It will be passed on also.
Yes, under the
All
contract.
right, thank you. Admiral Lista, Admiral, I remember in many of our hearings, PNOC had plans of venturing into natural gas. Can you give us an update also? And can you give us also an overview on how this will play into the natural gas policy of DOE? Now, what role PNOC will play in the natural gas policy?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon to everyone. Since day one of the administration of this current administration, the Philippine National Oil Company, being the operating arm of the Department of Energy, has studied all possibilities to make sure that there will be continuous source of gas for our current LNG operators after if and when there is no more gas in Malampaya. And the plan is also to assure prospective investors in LNG power plants that there will be source of LNG for them also in the future. And we were the first, and we invited. We talked to First Gen, we talked to Ilihan, we talked to KEPCO. We talked to everyone, including EOGHI, because they also had a plan to put up their own LNG plant in Bataan since 2014. We invited 93 LNG proponents all over the world, all the big guns of LNG. They all visited us. We discussed this with most governments because the first approach to our project was a government to government. Unfortunately, none worked out. And so we took the opportunity to bundle our, we have, Mr. Chairman, we have a 97.67 petajoules of bank gas, which is roughly $650 million. And we took this opportunity to bundle it with the project an LNG hub and to provide a 200 megawatt Army Reserve power plant, so that we will be shooting 3 birds with 1 stone. Monetize the bank gas of government, which is roughly $650 million, provide an Army Reserve power plant, and of course provide the current off-takers of continuing source of gas, provide the source of gas for all the prospective investors. We were already approached, Mr. Chairman, by 2 or 3 prospective investors in LNG power plants. And we were happy. Unfortunately, it is taking us time to find a partner. Out of the 7 who proposed, we are considering now 3. And we enlisted the support of the ADB as our consultant. The criteria that you were asking, Yusek Marcos, a while ago has been approved by the TWG and ADB. It will be due for approval this Friday by our Board of Directors. After that, we will go to stage 2, Mr. Chairman, which means we will now determine whether the proponents will satisfy what is needed for this country. If not, then we join with whoever is offering their services to DOE and design a system on how we can work together. But as I said, the involvement of PNOC as a part of government is important in this. Number 1, because we have the franchise for the pipeline. EWC cannot put all the pipeline from Pagbilao to Subic and to Batangas without our pipeline. And the pipeline franchise of First Gen will be due in 2023. So we will be the only existing company, Mr. Chairman, that will have the franchise because it is a part of our charter. Number two, this is a new industry. And if you go in Asia, Mr. Chairman, particularly Singapore, which roughly 90% of their power requirements are gas. 92%, tama ba ako, Vincent? 92% of power requirements in Singapore is gas. They started with the private sector, but today, the two operators of their LNG hub are both government-owned, the Singapore LNG and the Pavilion Gas. All other NOCs in Asia, particularly Myanmar, Singapore, Indonesia, Malaysia, and all our neighbors, they are all government NOCs. And this is not to control, and this is not to compete with the private sector. Because after a while, when we have already started and operated this, it will satisfy, Mr. Chairman, your question that will be questioned by Mr. Matibag later on. Is for the consumers, is it the cheapest that we can give to our people? Because if we let government get into this, we assure you our prices will be much cheaper because we will be using our bank gas, and of course we will be getting it not one particular captured trader, but from the cheapest source of LNG gas. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
So, Admiral Lista, let me just understand. No? So, what you're saying is PNOC is partnering with any proponents. No?
Yes, sir.
And when you say partnering, your direction is to build terminals, build pipelines, and all of the entire ecosystem of natural gas.
Yes, Mr.
Okay. And your equity will be the 650 million bank gas.
Initially, Mr. Chairman.
Initially,
yes,
okay. Sir. And
it will be a government loan-free project, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. But Admiral, have you? We talked about this, no, during the last time. Have you studied and made since the 650 million is essentially public funds, no? And this is these funds actually is the funds of the country, no? So meaning we have to be very careful, no, in terms of investing these public funds. Have you undertaken a feasibility study already? I'm not going to scrutinize the other private because obviously that's their risk, that's their own endeavor as a business entity. But with PNOC, it has a public interest attached to it. So have you undertaken?
We understand that, Mr. Chairman. We understand that, Mr. Chairman. That's why this will be addressed in stage 2 of our talk with our prospective partners. While they have already submitted their feasibility studies, the actual meat of the project will be in stage 2, Mr. Chairman. And it will, we will determine whether we go through with the project or look for other partners in the other side, which is the other offers with the DOE, Mr. Chairman.
As of this point, what stage is PNOC in terms of participating in this natural gas?
We have
project?
3 prospective partners now, and by tomorrow, Mr. Chairman, we'll approve the guidelines that we brought out. We negotiated with TWG and ADB,
okay,
with our consultant.
All right. And the 650 million bank, where is that stage already? Has that been sold or?
That is a part of that's the beauty of this approach, Mr. Chairman. We have been trying to sell the bank gas since 2009, but there are only two buyers, First Gen and Ilihan, Mr. Chairman, and they already have their GSPA. The GSPA of Ilihan will expire in 2022, and that's only possibly the time that I can sell to Ilihan. First Gen and I, we have been talking. Actually, we talked several times already for them to help us burn our bank gas. Unfortunately, I am limited by our bylaw and the what is that? Memorandum 2014 and a board resolution limiting my sale of the bank gas to the Ilihan price. In other words, if I sell now, sir, I can only sell it at 6.616 per gigajoules. And so when First Gen came to us, we had a very good discussion. In order to bring down the electricity, they said they can help us burn the bank gas, and so that there will be no stranded cost, stranded gas before 2024. They offered an amount, and I said I will go to jail if we sell that, but you please offer us in writing, and I will present it to the board. But unfortunately, maybe we should discuss this again. Thank you, Mr.
Assuming, Admiral, that you will not be able to sell the bank gas, no? What will be the strategy of PNOC? Will it still be participating in this natural gas? It seems to me that that is the equity, no, of PNOC, no, as a business enterprise. So ano magiging next move, no, if ever?
Because of the provision of 2014, the memorandum 2014, and the board resolution, Mr. Chairman, that I cannot sell it at a price lower than Ilihan. I have requested the board to approve the criteria so that I can sell it to anyone who is interested. Because in the 2014 memoranda, I can only sell it to First Gen actually. First Gen only. That is, I can only sell it to First Gen. I am limited to selling it to First Gen. So I am requesting the board that they remove that, and so I can publish it in the newspapers tomorrow, and then invite all interested partners who are willing to buy. If after 2 tries, Mr. Chairman, and we cannot sell, then and I cannot also include this in the bundled LNG hub, then the board now has a reason to probably review the price, and then we can negotiate with whoever is interested to buy. Because I think Ilihan and First Gen and Vires is interested to buy, Mr. Chairman.
Admiral, on a separate note, also during the budget hearing, I remember we talked about the property owned by PNOC, which is being envisioned also to be a terminal, no? If interested parties are willing to, I don't know, to lease or to purchase or to even partner with PNOC, ano pong update doon po? Because that seems to me a more logical and lesser risk, almost risk-free, no? But lesser risk for PNOC to undertake the natural gas project, no?
Actually, one of the sites, two of the sites that we have 4 sites that we are thinking, Mr. Chairman. One is the 5-hectare property of First Gen, because we have been talking since day one. We have already visited the property of First Gen. The second is our property in ESB, the energy supply base in Mabini, Batangas, which is a 19.5-hectare property. The third one is our 6.5-hectare property in Bawan, Batangas, which used to be the coal plant. Those are the 4, and the other one is the one beside First Gen, which is owned by NDC, Mr. Chairman, which is the 130-hectare property of NDC. And they are willing to give us, together with, we have been talking to Chevron, they are willing to lease us a 60-hectare property at the shoreline. Those are the 4 areas that we have been considering. And of course, Mr. Chairman, as I mentioned last time, we also have the 220-hectare property in Batangas, which EOGSR was interested in the past, but apparently they are having second thoughts. That's why it didn't push through, Mr. Chairman.
Wala hong movement with those properties, no?
Except for if we cannot get First Gen or if we cannot get San Pascual, Mr. Chairman, we will get and if we continue with the project, if we have a good partner,
we will do it with our lot in ESB in Mabini.
Well, the reason why I asked that, Admiral, because one of the most lucrative and abundant assets of government is land. No, we're abundant with land, and without giving fiscal incentives and reducing government revenues, land is actually a very good proposition for the proponents. And I remember during the budget hearing we discussed about this, and that's why I was very curious and also quite supportive in using the land that government owns. Kasi sayang if you don't use the land, you don't get any revenue. But if you use the land, at least you get some form of revenue. And that's really probably a good way of pushing the projects for natural gas.
Thank you.
Please take a look at that, Admiral, dahil andyan na yan no? If we make use of it, then mas maganda.
It is actually a part of our feasibility studies, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Admiral. And,
Mr. Chairman, if I may.
Yes.
I'd just like to quickly disabuse the Admiral Lista of the notion that we're no longer interested. We'd like to reiterate very clearly that our interest is continuing. That's all. Thank you.
Noted.
Thank you, Alfonso. I'm sure there, other than Mr. Alfonso, a lot of entities will be interested. No? If one proponent is interested, then I'm sure other proponents will be interested. And that's why, Admiral, it's really good to push this. This is the best way to incentivize. Andiyan na ho yung lupa ng gobyerno no? Our next resource person, Bibi Maralco. Any comments, Larry? Andito ba si Larry? Yan. Si Larry ang kilala ko dahil present yan parate no? Any comments, Larry? I know, Meralco, half of your supply comes from gas, if I'm not wrong.
That is correct, Your Honor. For the supply of the DU, for its captive market, last 2017, around 52% of supply came from natural gas-fired power plants. So these are the two first gas plants, Santa Rita, San Lorenzo, and the Ilihan plant, with the IPPA operated by South Premier.
And, Larry, that 50%, no? Obviously, going by the ratio of DOE of 70-20-10, no? 20 and 10 mid-merit and peaking, lumampas na yung gas nyo sa mid-merit and peaking. So 20% is diverted to base load, no? Is that a correct observation?
Currently, sir, the gas plants are operated as base load because there is also an upstream take or pay on the gas. So the arrangement between the Malampaya project and the power plant operators would know more about this, is that there's a take or pay on the gas supply. So this translates into a baseload operation of the power plants, which is the mode of operation in selling to Meralco as the final off-taker.
Isn't that a more expensive proposition? Because gas being slightly more expensive?
Over the past few years, generally coal has been cheaper, although in more recent years, the Malampaya price, because it's indexed to oil prices and oil prices have gone down, they have been cheaper in some instances in the past few years, in the past couple of years. But that can change here. But operationally, I guess we are constrained by the gas supply agreement with the take or pay on the volumes in the gas. The power plants will be operated as baseload power plants until the expiration of the gas supply agreement.
Well, I don't have the numbers right now, but again, a cursory review of the pricing. The 20% in excess of the mid-merit and peaking. If you use that 20%, or if you use coal for that 20%, then it will be cheaper for the consumers. Kasi the pricing is quite the pricing for coal is lower than gas, no? So this is not the right, but I'm just saying lang, in terms of entering into contract, how come it's that 70-20-10 is not being practiced by Meralco? No? And I would assume that 70-20-10 is really the optimal mix so that the consumers will get the best price.
So I think the 70-20-10 is, it characterizes the load. So 70% means 70% is a 24 by 7 load, and then the remaining is shoulder load and peak load. And then I guess in line with the DOE's policy of technology neutrality, the objective is to get least cost regardless of the technology.
20% is still considered least cost.
Because sir, it's
At
going
that
to
point
be,
in time.
it has to be supplied because it's demand that has to be supplied. So I think the question is how to supply the 20% in the least cost manner.
On a separate note, any comments regarding the discussion on the development of natural gas, the natural gas industry? Any comments, Larry?
In general, we support policies that will allow the development of a robust industry. I think we've communicated before that we are hoping for greater reliability in gas supply. We've had experiences. We've seen how fragile the supply can be when the Malampaya pipeline or Malampaya supply goes on outage, whether it's scheduled or unscheduled. So earlier there were discussions about having one supplier or several suppliers, and we hope that we can consider reliability of supply in the criteria so that we do not put the grid at risk when something happens to fuel supply.
Thank you, Larry. Next is Attorney Dimagiba. Attorney.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Una, maraming salamat that you always have consumer at the tip of your advocacy. 2 points lang po for clarification in relation to the depletion of the resources of Palampaya. Also in relation to prices din yun. At related din dun sa contracted capacity with Meralco. So by 2022, there will be gradual depletion of the resources in terms of megawatt delivery to Meralco. But Meralco had to continue supplying electricity to consumers. So in between 2022 and the final year that ubus na siya, someone else should be supplying alternative fuel to Meralco to supply the right amount of electricity to consumer. Siguro at this time, we should have some assurances na kung medyo mataas yung presyo ng alternative fuel, wag na sana maulit yung nangyari dun sa preventive maintenance ng Malampaya na consumer paid 66 centavos additional last year. So dapat cost neutral sa atin, kami mga consumers, no. Yung kontrata nila they should handle their contract among themselves. Ito. Baka kasi mas mahal yung diesel at that time, kung diesel na yung supply, sino mag-absorb ng added cost? I think that should be very clear already at this time. Less that 2022 comes, then Meralco will be going to ERC, and then we'll be asking for authority to pass on the added cost that they have to pay the generating plants. Nangyari na po kasi yan at naging issue yan sa ERC. So, if everybody's saying that there will be depletion of resources, kailangan klaro, walang dagdag presyo sa mga consumers. The third is really after spending almost 30 years in the energy sector, 10 years in upstream, 10 years in downstream, and another 10 years in the tertiary business, which is petrochem. I watched and I read the presentation of DOE on the roadmap, also the presentation Energy World on natural gas. Wala na ba talaga tayong programa to continue looking for indigenous natural resources? Alam po kasi after 40 years, I know technology had become well advanced. There are many ways to really tap the resources underground. Even in the US, they are so self-sufficient because they use this so-called shale technology where they are able to recover more oil than just vertical extraction. So many seismic studies, I'm sure about that, in the area. Because historically, Mr. Chairman, ang indigenous resources natin dyan talaga naman galing dyan sa Palawan o West Philippine Sea, no? Generally. Nag-umpisa tayo sa Nido, nag-umpisa tayo sa Galok, may Matinlok. Hindi ko na po nabutan yung Malampaya. Ibinalik na ako sa Petron at Pionosino, no? So, bakit walang programa ang gobyerno sa extraction, continuation of extraction of indigenous resources? Katulad po ng Malampayan yan. At that time po kasi, yung mga oil producing well, ang ginagawa ng service contractor doon, pag alam na nila mauubos, I guess some people are still around, no? Yung mga contemporary ko, sensi na kayo, no? Medyo mga bata-bata. Nagdi-drill na po sa mga, kukuha ng bagong service contract. Magdi-drill sa mga adjoining areas. Titignan kung may resource pa yung area na yun. Sayang po kasi LNG, if you put up LNG facility, nakita ko sa presentation ng Director Abad zero duty on importation. So basically, ang policy is you import. Pagkatapos sinasabi niya zero. Huwag mo nang asahan yung zero, Director Abad. Kasi under this administration, they will tax all opportunity to raise revenue. I mean, you don't assume that anymore. There will be new taxes and they will continue to impose higher taxes. So, if you study, kailangan hindi zero. Kasi pag hindi na zero, hindi mo na masasagot si Senator Gatchalian, how much to the consumer, magkano ba yan natural gas niyan at the end of the day? So, siguro po yung DOE, as you go to your planning session, sabi nyo, nadinig nyo doon sa dating taga-DOE, kami po kasi nagtayo lahat ng mga infrastructure doon sa Port Bonifacio, no? Wala akong nadinig na continuation ng programa. Maghanap pa tayo. I'm sure doon po sa West Philippine Sea, andyan na, mas mura na po technology noon. Noon yung deep sea drilling, ang mahal po. Pero ngayon, I'm sure, kasi ang dami ng magagaling na equipment mas cheaper na yan. Pero walang kapalit kasi kung indigenous LNG, basically, you import. Dependent ka sa presyo abroad. I don't see any, well, because I belong to the old school, no, that's why I'm repeating it, but pero dapat siguro meron pa rin siyang, if you have 100%, meron kang target kung ilang percent yung local, indigenous. Yan kasi issue niya sa West Philippine Sea. Atin yun Sabi ng Permanent Court of Arbitration, sa inyo yan, Pilipinas yan. So how do you tap the resources underneath the West Philippine Sea? Yun lang po. Thank you.
We're actually thinking of having a separate session on that, what you comment on the other potential areas for oil and gas, no? Including the contested areas. Of course, that is a whole new different ball game in terms of geopolitics and international relations. But we will definitely talk about that because nakakonektado ho yan to the depletion of Malampaya, no? And I think si Yusek has some information about
Sir,
that.
if may I inform this honorable August body. Sir, we have a continuing programs for this. Actually, the former Philippine Energy Contracting Program, which is almost scheduled every 2 or 3 years, wherein every contracting round has its own circular. Now we evolve it and we make it a hybrid one, meaning this is now the Philippine Conventional Energy Contracting Program, wherein just 2 weeks ago we have published 14 predetermined areas. Those are potential areas in the 16 sedimentary basins, and of course there is a somewhat directives that we cannot issue some determined areas or some potential areas in the West Philippine Sea. But on the other, beside these predetermined areas, there are also so many potential areas in the other parts of these 16 sedimentary basins. Meaning, this PCECP allowed nomination by publication, and then later on subject it to challenges. So a certain contractor can identify an area wherein they think there is a potential resource there, and then after nominating, pass to the DOE for some clearances, like no overlapping on the predetermined areas and other minimal requirements like no mining ban or no exploration ban on that specific LGU. So with that, if they submit this nominated area, we publish it and then we subject it to challenges. So to be assured also of a competitive and transparent bidding. So there are, sir, for the information of everybody, there are ongoing programs that particularly promotes this contracting program, especially to those indigenous resources that we have mentioned earlier. So marami po, and there are some pending awards also that because we have to understand there are 2 issues right now, very, very important issues. One is the dispute in the West Philippine Sea, and there are some, of course, some considerations to be really considered on that aspect. And the other one is the existing case in the COA, which is somewhat the pending issue affects the interest of those investors who really want to do it, because there is somewhat uncertainty on the taxation of the, but still there are so many aggressive investors who really want to invest in the Philippines.
Okay, Yusek, just for the information to everyone, the oil and gas, upstream oil and gas is also under Yusek Marcos, no? And Yusek later on will have a briefing. We'll invite everyone also as to the future of oil and gas exploration here in our country. And last in our list, Ernie, any comments?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I hope you don't mind. You may be surprised that our recommendations are a bit specific, primarily because, well, the executives involved in the committee, MAP Committee on Energy, were retired executives from the downstream and upstream. So if you will allow, Mr. Chair, thank you very much for inviting MAP. We fully support the Senate Resolution number 699, entitled Resolution Directing the Appropriate Senate Committee to conduct an inquiry on the Philippine downstream natural gas policy, with the end in view really of enacting appropriate legislation. MAP believes that although there is an Executive Order number 66, series of 2001, and a DOE Department Circular 2017-11-0012, we feel that there is not enough clarity on how the Philippines will manage the decline of the Malampaya natural gas reservoir, slot in new exploration and production gas finds, and thirdly, develop an LNG facility or facilities to support the existing gas-fired power plants. Again, because of the ambitious Build, Build, Build program, the growth of electricity demand is expected to grow really from 16 gigawatts currently to about 43 gigawatts by 2040. We believe that in MAP, steps should be taken now in order to give clarity on the path forward And in this regard, we would like to break up our presentation in three parts. Firstly, to stabilize the downstream, existing downstream. No? And in particular, these are two specific recommendations, Mr. Chair. Number one is to recommend that the COA drop their taxation against the Malampaya Consortium. If you will recall, Mr. Chair, this amounts to 2.5 billion and has created uncertainty with respect to the arbitration cases that were filed against the government and among the consortium. I'm sure my friend Mr. Don would be able to provide the details. Clearly, this shows we want the government to show that the investors, that the Philippines honors its contracts and does not change policies midstream. No? And I think this COA issue has caused a significant uncertainty with respect to the upstream developers. Number two, and this is related to KEPCO, is really to settle the Ilihan ownership issue. This is a complex discussion, and PISAM would really be in the best position, but as the chairman is all aware, there is this ongoing legal cases between San Miguel and PISAM regarding the ownership of Ilihan. Once, if this is not settled, then the issue of whether Ilihan will be able to draw natural gas or not at the end of its contract period remains uncertain as to who will be the one to operate Ilihan if this ownership issue is not settled. So that's close to 1,200 megawatts. So that's as far as the first two items are concerned, Mr. Chair. With respect to the current ongoing, I think this was already mentioned by you, Sec. Marcos, we need to assure the stability of being able to continue to draw gas from the reservoir, because the contract of Shell or the consortium will expire in 2024. And if the contract is not renewed, nobody's going to withdraw the gas. And so what happens is that there will be two major impacts with respect to this. No? One is the bank gas of PNOC, which is about $650 million, which I think Yusek Marcos and Admiral Listad indicated. This will end up being stranded if there is no continuity in the operation of the Camago Malampaya. In other words, the gas will remain underground. The other point is really, if there is no clarity with respect to continuing the operation of Camago Malampaya, the remaining gas over and above the bank gas will not be withdrawn, and therefore that will end up with close to 3,200 megawatts of stranded power plants that cannot be competitive, primarily because there's nobody to withdraw the gas. No? So that issue of who, clearly I think Mr. Paulina has already indicated there is enough gas. No? But the point is, if you don't extend the contract of the consortium, then who is going to withdraw the gas? No? Sure, it's easy. You can always say you can always find somebody to withdraw the gas. No? But whatever happens to all of the investments that have been made with respect to the drilling platform, et cetera, which, again, is something that must be addressed. Last but not least, and moving forward, Mr. Chair, is that we all know the gas from Malampaya is finite. And again, as Attorney Dimagibad indicated, there should be continuing exploration and production in the West Philippine Sea in order to determine new gas. But in the meantime, there has to be, in addition to continuing the operations of Camago Malampaya to finally extract the remaining gas, there must be an integrated solution specifically to tie in the importation of LNG, because we all know that Camago Malampaya is a finite resource. And therefore, there has to be some form of phasing in of LNG import facilities to make sure that the existing and future gas-fired power plants will continue to operate. Now, whether this will be in the form of FSRUs or land-based is not really the important thing here is to develop a specific plan to implement the phase over once Camago Malampaya runs out in 2027, 2028. With that, Mr. Chair, it's important we believe that government steers are given enough emphasis in order to assure that there is continued operation of the Camago Malampaya power plants. And in this regard, we would be more than willing to assist the Honorable Senator, Chairman, in whatever details our proposal may entail. Again, we want to thank you for giving us the opportunity to present our proposal. Thank you.
Thank you, Ernie. And any last comments or any reaction to what you have heard from the other resource persons? Any comments po? Anything that you want to add or to react to? No, kung wala, I have a last question, Yusek Marcos, no, and I think this is just to cap the hearing. You've submitted to us 10 potential proponents for the development of the downstream natural gas industry. Ano po yung timetable nitong itong development na ito? What timetable are we looking at? Where do we see actual earth movement? Where do we see the first importation aside from Energy World? No, I understand that Energy World has been sending in ships. No, but aside from Energy World, when will we see the first importation of natural gas? No?
Sir, actually, those 10, sir, has submitted their LOI, and after the submission of LOI, we are given 3 days to reply, to come up with a pre-application conference. So those 10, sir, has presented their profile and their business model. And in counting, sir, there are some investors pa na nagpupunta like yesterday. So it was not included yesterday.
So when do we see approvals? Just a broad timetable. No, I don't want to.
The concept, sir. Actually, the PDNGR says that it's a first come first serve basis, sir. So, as we go along with the discussion in each every meeting, we are clear, and they also know this, that they should submit application when they are already completed with regards to requirements para po makapag-secure na sila ng NTP. And one of the pinaka-significant requirements, sir, that will give them the green go signal is that yung financial closing, sir. So, and we are very vocal in every meetings that we are doing that we needed to realize the responsible time may be fourth quarter of this year. But of course, sir, we are also looking at the early quarter or first semester of next year. Doon po naman sa mga sinasabi nila as we go on discussing with them, kasi after the pre-application conference po, they still continue to communicate with us. Meaning yung interest po has not lessened, nandiyan pa rin po. Talagang ang kailangan lang, sir, kaya kinakailangan ng financial closing para seryoso talaga. Walang flipping, walang changing of or giving deed of assignment to somebody, kundi they are free. The 10 are free to make their own consortium kung kinakailangan nila isa't isa. Wala pong bawal doon. Pero ang mahalaga sa lahat dito, sir, is the financial closing. Once they get the financial closing, ready na po yun, makukomplete niya kailangan requirements, pwede na namin silang issue ng notice to proceed. And after which, the PSR, which is the permit to construct, expand, rehabilitate, and maintain. Then after that, sir, the POM, which is the permit to operate and maintain. So we're looking at sana, sa lahat ng discussions po namin, they agree naman, wala naman pumumano, and they're really parang they are joining the race. Sana po, before the end of this year or early next year, magkaroon po ng groundbreaking dito sa project nito.
Thank you, Sec. And again, I just want to put on record my my opinion on what I mentioned earlier about inadvertently, creating a monopoly. I just want to put on record and also voice out my sentiments to the department that inadvertently, by limiting the number of proponents being approved, we might create a monopoly that we all know at the end of the spectrum will be the consumers, no? And that's what I'm very cautious about, because we've been working very hard to lower down the prices for electricity, and you all know, both of us have been working very hard to make sure that the consumers get the best prices possible. No, so I just want to put that on record and voice it out. Before we end, any last, meron pa hong last comments or opinion? Attorney?
As stated previously by the chairman of this committee, the commission respectfully emphasized that it still holds that regulation should stay with the ERC and DOE on policy on this particular industry development. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Ako, hindi ko na magsasalita eh. No?
We're just happy listening with the input of the resource persons, and we're taking notes.
That is a very good point, and in fact, I raised that earlier. No?
Yes, sir.
The principle of separating the policy maker and the regulators really to prevent conflict of interest in the future. No? Especially in, you might design a policy for a specific entity and regulate that policy to favor that specific entity. That's why we have to separate. I'm in favor of that concept, no, and that will lead me to a request from everyone to please submit to us your position paper regarding the existing department circular of DOE. No, I know that you need time to give your comments, but the department circular of DOE is the prevailing framework that governs the downstream natural gas industry. No? So please give us your comments. No? Attorney,
yes, Mr. Chair. Actually, we're about to submit our position, but the commission will take it up to tomorrow's commission meeting.
Those comments and position papers are very important to us, because that will lead us into the crafting of a bill or a legislation that will be the guiding framework for the development of a downstream natural gas industry. There are two bills filed. One is Senate Bill 765 by Senator Escudero, which is actually a bill on downstream natural gas industry. I'd like to encourage you to take a look at that. And the other one is Senate Bill 1371 filed by Senator Binay. This is in relation to the pipeline for natural gas. So we will combine these two bills into a much more comprehensive bill. A cursory review of the bill, kulang dito yung terminal facility. No? That's why we will be including the terminal facility in this two proposed bill. But I would like to urge everyone to please take a look at these two bills, because we will hear these bills soon, and we will take your inputs from the prevailing department circular on natural gas. That's number one. And then number two, would like to again request DOE for the study on the impact on the electricity bill, the simulation that you ran. Would like to get that. Would like to also get the timeline, Yusek Marcos, on the extension of the contract. You said that you have a timeline. Would like to understand the timeline for the decision whether to extend the contract of Shell or not. And you also like to get a timeline on the development of the natural gas industry. You mentioned earlier fourth quarter or maybe early next year, but it's good to have a definitive timeline until the actual groundbreaking and the first imported natural gas that we'll be receiving as a country. May 3, 1 week from now, is the deadline. Okay ba ho yun? Yeah, pareho tayo, we'll be out. Yusek Marcos and I will be visiting Austria upon the invitation of the Austrian government to study their nuclear power policies there. No? So this committee and the DOE were invited to take a look, observe, ask questions. So next week magkasama ho tayo. So, ano na lang po, May 10, no? May 10 na lang, May 10. All right, so with that, Director?
Mr. Chair, just a quick reply to the lady from the Commission. We have to clarify the term regulation. It seems that the understanding now is that the whole regulation is given to the DOE. It's not. We have to follow the rule and the existing laws. As mentioned in the presentation, on the standard, much like in the same case with the downstream oil, we have the technical committee who designed the standards for the facility and the quality of the product. And that's precisely the job, basically, of the Department of Energy. But on the environmental side, the NCIP, the Department of Labor, that's why we created the interagency. We designed the regulation, the creation of an interagency group who will actually do all the regulation based on the appropriate jurisdiction of the different agencies. So, ERC would particularly do the job on the rate policy, the rate making policy perhaps, but based on the regulation, we have done that as much as the power of the department can allow at this point in time, because there's no specific legislation yet to specifically point ERC as the responsible unit for that rate-making policy. That's why we stated there that the DOE, in coordination with the ERC, for the meantime, there's no existing legislation, specifically for the downstream natural gas, specifying the role of the ERC at this time. So we have to clarify the term regulation.
Well, that's why we need legislation. No? That's why we're here, and we want to hear these comments and even the conflicts, so that we will thresh it out with the new legislation being proposed. Actually, si Senator Escudero has proposed a good downstream legislation. We just need to refine it and get more inputs from the stakeholders. No? But again, Attorney Opley, submit to us your position paper. We will definitely take that seriously and incorporate a lot of your comments in the upcoming legislation. All right? Any Attorney Jerpy?
Yes, Mr. Chair. Just a last word on the concerns on monopoly. Let me just give the information that when the rules and regulations were about to be made, the primary reason and the first reason that cropped out was energy security. So what happens when we don't have not gas anymore? What happens when we have this 3,400 megawatts of power having no fuel to use? And the logical thing is to protect the 3,400 megawatts, and we don't expect these power generation plants to get supply from different suppliers. These are non-divisible. So that's the reason. There's no intention of making any monopoly when that was thought of.
That's one of the red flags that I want to raise, no? Because in crafting policy, there are inadvertent results, no? And one of which is really creating an entity that might be a monopoly, no? And that's why I just want to raise the red flag, no? And we'll be continuously reviewing the events leading up to the development of the industry, and we'll be continuously reviewing the department circular also and running some of our own models, no? So with that, we'll wait for your submissions. Last day is May 10. All right, thank you. And once again, thank you very much for your time. The hearing is suspended. Thank you very much po.